Hey, what's up? It's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. And with me, I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. What's going on, man?
Yo, man, happy to be doing this. It's been a crazy week. How about you?
It has been, in the middle of the storm, but, dry, surviving, so no complaints. No complaints at all.
Absolutely, man. None for me either. I'm safe and sound, and as you always say, perspective. And yeah, man, I'm eager to talk it up. We got some things we learned this week at the end of the week, and we thought it might be a different kind of show at first, but the
Yeah.
gods were kind to us, the rap
Nah,
gods.
man. Speaking of storms, the floodgates open on Friday. There's been a lot of speculation about Kendrick Lamar now for months, weeks, years. And we finally got some news from the man himself. It's very rare that Kendrick speaks. He's not active on social media. He released a statement letting us know he doesn't even like look at a phone for several months at a time, which is I can believe that. I think that's 100% true. Can you imagine though, like the kind of zen, like solitude you would have if you didn't have a phone?
You know, it's funny. I had dinner with an uncle this week, and we were talking about the Powerball and the Mega Millions. And I said, if I won, the first thing I would do is chuck this into the river. And I would get a landline. I'd call people, but I do it on my terms. And I always heard like Rick Rubin was like that. Like you could get him on email, but he wasn't somebody you could just like call. And I heard back in the day, like 2000, 7, 2008, 2009, Kanye was like that. We may be talking about why that's not the case anymore a little later. But I think that is the ultimate luxury and the ultimate zen of just being able to control what communication comes into your life, like that.
Yeah, man, it's a beautiful thing. And Kendrick, he's always kind of marched to the beat of his own drum. And so he released a statement that kind of shook the hip hop world. He mentioned that he has an album that he's working on, which is no surprise. I'm sure he's been working on an album for years now. Notably, he didn't say it was coming anytime soon. There was no release date or hint like that. But he did say that the album was going to be his final album for TDE. And that was a huge, huge thing. Now, as I'm sure you are too, but I'm a massive, massive TDE fan. I mean, for me, they were really my soundtrack of the 2010s and have grown to be incredibly important to me, not only musically, but personally. I have a very deep relationship with the label and with many of the artists from, their early days and the early parts of the decade. Was with them probably, no exaggeration, someone from the camp at least once every 2 weeks or so for a couple of years, probably between 2011 and 2013, maybe even 2014. And so to see Kendrick say that this is his last album for TDE was like a major, major thing for me. And listen, he did it with love. It doesn't seem like there's any acrimony or beef, but we'll get into that. And Top Dawg reciprocated that love too. But for me, it's the end of an era. And even if both go on to do great things, Kendrick and TDE, without each other, which I hope and believe both will do, it's something I think is worth celebrating. And so I want to spend a lot of time today just kind of detailing the movement that has been TDE. But what were your thoughts about TDE? What's your relationship with the label?
Yeah, I mean, mine's a little different than yours. I do relate to you. Like it means the world to me personally. I I believe I may be the first person, if not, I'm in the first two or three to ever interview J Rock. I wrote a piece for Ambrosia some years ago talking about that. I think around the time he won the Grammy. But I remember in 2006, 2007, having that opportunity, and at 2011, which was a very important year for me. At the time, I was the editor in chief of Hip Hop DX, and I really positioned the site, which I believe was the biggest news and music site in the hip hop space at the time, to get all the way behind TDE and get really all the way behind at that point Kendrick Lamar, Absol, ScHoolboy Q. So these are guys that I really feel like helped hip hop turn an important page, and it is a meaningful message, you know, especially coming from somebody who I don't think has ever trolled us in the way of Kendrick, and, you know, speaks with tremendous intent and significance. And I have to add one other thing, you know, you and I had a debate about 5 or 6 years ago about what do labels mean. I remember at the time we were talking about, I forget who artist had signed to so and so place, and I said, oh, this is news. And you challenged me and you said, I don't think this is news. I don't know that labels matter like they once did of back in the day of like players for teams. TDE, you know, growing up, I adored, you know, Def Jam and Death Row and Tommy Boy and Wild Pitch. TDE was the first label that I remember wanting to buy merchandise of since Rawkus, because it really represented a lifestyle, and that lifestyle was modeled by several individuals, both music makers and executives and producers behind the scenes. And, you know, that's why this is such a big moment for you and I to talk about today.
Yeah, man, that's really interesting. You know, there were a lot of comparisons of TDE and Death Row early on, and I think that was superficial and knee jerk. And in fact, you know, there was some hot water that GQ got into for making the comparison in a magazine article once when Kendrick was Man of the Year. But, you know, I think if you dig deeper, TDE is much closer to Rawkus, you know, super lyrical cats, very cerebral, very musical music, you know, rhyme styles are very complex. You know, I think, and it was truly an underground movement for quite some time, even with, you know, Kendrick being signed to Aftermath and Q being signed to Interscope. You never got a sense that the label was in any way like influencing their music and, you know, trying to get them to do radio songs and things like that. They were always very, very true to their sound and to themselves.
Excellent point. Yeah, I mean, you know, Pharoah Monch had come from Organized Confusion and was already an established artist, but the way that Rawkus took talented acts, whether you want to, I mean, Mos Def, Yasin Bey is a tremendous example of that, Talib Kweli, LP. They took artists that, you know, had taken the steps on their own, but believed in their development and created albums that took artists out of pretty much obscurity and used a system in place of, you know, we're going to start with a 12-inch single, then we're going to have a music video, then eventually we'll build to an album, and we'll use compilations and features to build them up. I 100% agree with that. And then on top of it too, I agree as well. The Death Row thing was never something I subscribed to. I thought that was very knee-jerk, to use your word. But the one thing that I do think is fair is powerful Black-owned business. But you can also draw comparisons to Rap-A-Lot. You can draw comparisons to other places, you know, No Limit, Cash Money. It doesn't have to be, you know, Death Row. And I always thought that was, I agreed with Top Dawg himself for pushing hard against that line.
Yeah, I mean, Def Jam, Bad Boy, that list goes on, right? You know, so
Yeah.
So I want to go through, man. And so you mentioned Kendrick not trolling us. You know, TDE has trolled fans a number of times over the years, including just a few weeks ago when Top released a tweet and an Instagram saying the wait is over. Had people like myself counting the number of exclamation points at the end, like looking for clues. You know, but Kendrick has not. But let me ask you, the way that he released this information, you know, he put up a site, and the site is called, it is spelled OKLAMA.com. First of all, do you have any thoughts on what that means or how to say it?
Man, I don't. I've butchered a few words and names on this podcast before and over the last 30 some years. No, I don't, but I have a feeling that this will be an acronym for an upcoming album. And I have no reason to believe that, other than Kendrick, you know, is one of these artists that we speak about their bodies of work in acronyms, which is just something. And then they're never easy ones, you know, they're never very like easy on the tongue. But we're gonna see this again. That's all I know. Do you have any speculation though?
I do. So Kendrick is a serious dude, right? Like it's clear in his music, his demeanor. He always comes across with a certain kind of gravitas. But Kendrick is low key also hilarious. I'll never forget this time I went to. It was like a private show that he did for some brand. It was probably like 2014 or so. And he was on the stage, just cracking jokes in between songs, like almost like a comedian, and was killing it, like really, really hilarious. And you see glimpses of that, like in his appearance in Power, as the crack addict. He's got a real sense of humor. And I think after sitting back and watching people dissect Damn, ourselves, his entire podcast dedicated to it, like 17 hours, like dedicated to an hour-long album. I think he's having a little fun with this. And, the first thing I heard was, "Oh, Lamar." And I had to like go and check Duckworth to see if he said, "Okay, Lamar." But I just think he's saying, "Okay, Lamar." Like almost like, "Oh, okay, Lamar," like, like joking. So,
Yeah, that's tight.
and I think he is having fun watching people kind of like, run around in circles trying to decode the mystery of that. I could be wrong, but that's my take.
I know I was a little bit, I gave you some pushback on the and I was right. I think
You were
you'll
right.
for
You
that
were
one.
right. You're right.
But I like that. I think that theory holds a lot of water. And you and I have said on here before of, Damn was such a heavy album. I mean, the last few, To Pimp a Butterfly, and Kendrick is capable of being lighthearted, and we see that sometimes on his features. And I haven't been around him. It's funny, we can talk about it in a minute. You've had the interfacing with Kendrick that I have not. So I don't know things about his personality other than what I get from, the interviews, and the same as anyone else that's a fan. But, with all that's going on in the world, I've speculated, and you and I have talked about it, that he would come with the zeitgeist album of what the 2020s are, spiritually, racially, socially, politically. And what if he just hooks a left and makes a lighthearted album that is still hugely relevant? Because I can't imagine Kendrick Lamar not being relevant to people like you and I and the millions of others, but it's in a much lighthearted tone. And if you're right, man, that would be, you've done it before.
Yeah, so I just think that's about the website. The album, I do think, is going to be heavy, and he says, he says some things in the statement. He says, "I spent most of my days with fleeting thoughts, writing, listening, and collecting old beach cruisers." But then he says, "Love, loss, and grief have disturbed my comfort zone, but the glimmers of God speak through my music and family." So, if you listen to Dissect and you go back and really study Kendrick's albums, almost every album has some very significant religious presence, very significant, Cushion Corinthians, Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. In fact, all of like Good Kid, Mad City was ultimately about redemption and like, Jesus saving him. Damn, we all know what that was. And a lot of To Pimp a Butterfly too. So, it would be a real hard left if he actually didn't have some religion or religious implications in his music. But I think him saying that in a statement is a clear indicator that it's coming. And he talks about, he says, "As I continue to pursue my life's calling," he says, "May the Most High continue to use Top Dawg as a vessel for candid creators." And so he's looking at this as more than a music career or anything like that. This is truly, his calling, and that has religious implications in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too if he feels, and I can't wait to learn more. I don't want to speculate too much, but if he feels the way we've seen other artists, just like a higher purpose of, should I be doing other things than rapping? And clearly, it's been more than 4 years since Damn, and he's been doing things, and the general public has no idea what they are on a daily basis. So yeah, it just leads a whole bunch of questions, and it comes out of nowhere. I do think we will see music by the end of the year. You asked me that several times throughout this, and I think there's a reason we're getting this message now, but it lets me know that the bow is probably tied on at least some of the music that we're going to get.
Maybe. I've given up hope of like speculating as to when the album is coming. I think there's probably going to be some announcements about the business and like some moves he's making in other contexts that maybe necessitated this statement now, but we'll see. There's one last thing in the statement that I thought was really interesting. He said, "Thank you for keeping me in your thoughts. I prayed for you all." That was heavy to me because Feel was my song of 2017 and most of 2018. And throughout the album, or the refrain on that song is "Ain't nobody praying for me." So it's interesting that he said, "Thank you for keeping me in your thoughts." And I prayed for you all because I'm wondering if that sentiment still stands. But did it resonate with you in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it had potency, and that's funny too because that is definitely it might be my favorite Kendrick Lamar song of all time. And it's a hallmark of that period of 2017 and 2018 for you and for me, and it's one that I come back to. But I didn't make that immediate connection. Like I didn't hear it the way that you heard it, knee jerk. But I thought that was just so much Kendrick style of I'm praying for you all.
Yeah.
It's so it's such a powerful gesture that if somebody else said it, I might think of it in like the thoughts and prayers, like politician way. But there's such gravitas, to use the word you just said a moment ago, to that statement.
Yeah. I actually prayed for Kendrick that night, man. It's crazy.
Wow.
So I want to go through and do a timeline, man. Celebrating. This is not in any way suggesting that it's the end of days for TDE, because I firmly believe that they have a tremendous amount of talent. I believe that Top Dawg has been a force and will continue to be so. But I think it's worthy of celebrating this label, and why not do it now at this kind of like major crossroads? So I thought
absolutely, and I think. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
I think you alluded to it, but Top Dawg publicly reacted to the statement. Top Dawg, the founder of the company, and has basically, I'll paraphrase it. I can read the quote if we prefer, but this is all going according to plan. They've made music, made money, made history, and he said we did that 10 times over. And he encouraged anyone speculating to see this as a victory lap. So I mean, it's definitely with that agreement in mind that I think we're having, this discussion too.
Word. So let's do that victory lap, man. I want to do a timeline, and then I want us to really kind of contextualize what TDE as a label has meant in the last, decade, and then also what their place in history as a label has been thus far. So it starts off in 2006. I think, well, many people know that J-Rock was the flagship artist. Kendrick ultimately became the biggest artist, but J-Rock was the cornerstone around which the label was built. And he kicked things off, with a mixtape. And as I was going back and looking at the catalog, it's interesting. They're very strategic. They released nothing but mixtapes for like the first 3 years, and then a couple of EPs, and then they started kicking in with albums. But his first mixtape was Watt's Finest. And you said you interviewed him shortly after that. So tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. At the time, I was the features editor of All Hip Hop. I'd been there 4 to 5 years, depending on whether it was 06 or 07. And a dear friend of mine and somebody who I believe you consider a friend, Richie Abbott, who's been a veteran, publicist who's connected some of the interviews that we've had on this podcast and throughout the years on, AFH and AFH TV. He was the head of Warner Brothers PR at the time, and brought to me, knows that I'm a huge fan of West Coast history and West Coast gangster rap, and said, hey, we just signed an artist and there's this movement called TDE, Top Dawg Entertainment. And, their artist is J-Rock. And I think you, Jake Payne, more than anyone are going to appreciate it because Richie knows I'm a fan of Mac 10 and a West Side Connection and Dre and Corrupt and, Sugar Free and on and on and on. And he gave me some information at that point. I mean, this is the MySpace era. So I get like 3 or 4 songs and they had very few views on them, and what Richie and the other execs at Warner had said to me is, this guy's street presence is not translating to the online. That's one of the reasons why, we were being introduced, because All Hip Hop was a very dominant force at the time in breaking artists and putting artists on people's radars. And I remember getting on the phone with J-Rock and Punch and Top Dawg himself, as well as I believe Richie. and we spoke for probably like 25, half an hour. And, you know, I've reconnected with J-Rock a few times in the years since. And you and I have talked about this. I mean, he can be a man of very few words. And at that time, like many new artists, just kind of seemed guarded. And, you know, probably had this loquacious guy on the phone trying to keep him talking. And but one thing I always remember is, you know, J-Rock is from Nickerson Gardens, you know, which is a famed, legendary, you know, housing project in Watts. And I mentioned just being a rap nerd, OFTB, Operation from the Bottom, which was this group that later had ties to Death Row, but came out in the early 90s as kind of a street education, but very gangster. They were all bounty hunter bloods. And I mentioned that because they're from that same houses. And J-Rock lit up. And I remember, I think it was Top Dawg really appreciated that connection too, that I knew enough history. And as we'll talk about in time, you know, that J-Rock was making his own inroads with those tapes, but it didn't translate to the greater space right away. Like so many great artists, it wasn't an overnight, you know, victory or success. It took time. And, you know, we're going to talk about that a lot.
Well, so when you heard that mixtape, one, did you like it? Did it resonate with you? And two, did you think that he had a future?
The first part is, yeah, I mean, I liked it. It was hard nosed. That's always the word that I use to describe J-Rock's delivery. He's got a gruff, you know, I mean what I say and I say what I mean without being like menacing. That's not what one of the words that I would use for J-Rock. Did it have a future? I don't know. I mean, that was the mid 2000s. So there were, you know, on one hand, you had an artist that I've believed in since the late 90s, Crooked I. This is pre-Slaughterhouse. He's kind of struggling to translate. Glasses Malone, Nipsey Hussle. At that point, I had done Nipsey's very first press bio, and Nipsey was kind of bumping around the industry. You know, it was very hard for street-minded West Coast artists that were not tied to Dr. Dre to make it. The one exception of that time was always The Game. But The Game, as you and I, I'm sure agree, has had some of the finest production in the 2000s. And The Game is not, you know, his imagery and his style and his iconography is very West Coast, but Game sometimes raps to me very East Coast, you know, and his timing and his delivery and some of his beat selection. And J-Rock was this other thing that was just super duper West Coast. So did it have a future? There's times where I get off the phone with artists and I'll be like, yo, I know you're going to be a star. And I don't think I said that to J-Rock, but I told him I liked him and I knew that we would be talking again, which we did.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I heard J-Rock was Follow Me Home. And it was the song Just Like Me. And that just, it blew me away. His voice was so penetrating, you know, and so it just had so much like pain in it, you know. Was his voice, was his vocal style like that at that point, or was it still like in progress?
It was in progress. It was more of a staccato delivery. It was just very like, I mean, you know, like kind of tough. There wasn't a lot of humanity there. I think the gift of J-Rock is sort of like Jay-Z this way. Like, you know, I mean, people say that Jay-Z lacked a certain depth that Nas had. And I kind of disagree because Regrets is on, you know, Reasonable Doubt. And that is a heavy duty, soulful song. But I think J-Rock in the early days was very guarded in the information he would give you. And he was very much rapping, you know, from the corner for the corner. And I think over time with these albums, as you say, you know, that we've since gotten, and they mean so much to people, we've gotten more of the heart and soul of J-Rock. And when that comes through, the hard aesthetic has never been compromised, and it just creates this beautiful kind of balance.
Okay, and now you said he signed to Warner. Now, is this the Strange Music joint venture, or is it just straight Warner?
It's just straight Warner. And it's funny though, because Richie would be very instrumental and would kind of become one of TDE's de facto publicists. He was always my window, more than Interscope could ever offer me, into these guys. And luckily, you know, for one album later on, J-Rock made the move. And to this day, Richie and I talk about it. I may have met Kendrick one time. And if so, I had dinner with J-Rock in 2011 in Kansas City on the Strange Music Tour. And J-Rock had one or two people with him. And I am 90% sure, 90, not 95, not 85, that K-Dot was sitting next to him, because I believe on that tour, even though it was right around the time Section 80 dropped, I believe that K-Dot functioned as his hype man. I could be mistaken, and if any Punch Top, anyone else sees this, Dave, you know, let me know if I'm mistaken. But yeah, I got to reconnect, and Richie is one of those people, when they tell TD's story, I think he matters because he was, you know, a big advocate for these guys and helped put them in position to get distribution and get infrastructure that an upstart label isn't always going to have.
Yeah, it's quite possible it was Kendrick. Kendrick can be very quiet and you know, unassuming in a room. Like you can easily overlook him. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, and was definitely J Rock's hype man. We know that there's that famous video floating around of when Charles Hamilton was, you know, battling people and challenging people to come up on stage and rap with him. And this dude comes up and, you know, it's like, oh, it's J Rock's man. It's his hype man, right? And he proceeds to like just lace a verse that's just like fire. And like, you know, you can see it in Charles Hamilton's eyes, like, uh-oh, like little homie got something. So yeah. Okay, so now 2007, Kendrick enters the scene with TDE himself and releases Training Day, his first mixtape with him. And to me, that was almost like a Lil Wayne tribute, you know, K-Dot, you know, and he was called K-Dot at that time, had, you know, he released a video when Lil Wayne a few years ago said, he suggested he was going to retire, like asking Wayne, telling Wayne he can't retire, like he means too much to hip hop, blah, blah, blah. And so he's clearly a very serious Wayne fan. But it was crazy to me how similar his cadence was to Wayne in 2007. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Like up and coming MCs do this quite a bit before they find their voice. They try and, I don't even know if it's conscious or not, but they mimic kind of their influences and what's hot. And Wayne was, I think, was Carter 3 2007 or 2008 was
2008. 2008
yeah.
It was out, but 2007 I remember, you know, if you were paying attention to mixtapes, you know, Wayne had several different series going on at the same time. I mean, he was the biggest thing out. I remember in Philly, like that's what people were listening to. And it wasn't, I mean, the Carter 2 was out since 2005, but it was what Wayne was doing on a month-to-month basis with these tapes. That was just absolutely insane, you know, with Empire and DJ Drama and yeah.
So Training Day comes out. It's very clear that Kendrick has skills. But to me, there was nothing extraordinary about that mixtape. And, you know, I heard it later on. I didn't hear it present day. And if I had heard it back then, I don't think I would have been hooked in, you know. But did you hear it real time? And
no, I don't even know if it was sent to me. And if it was so, I was so, you know, I was getting hit up by a lot at that point, just professionally. And I also, you know, at that point in time, I don't know how much I was searching for the new and next artist. You know, I just had that stance. So no, I found, like you, I found it later and I had the same kind of processing. I heard Training Day long after Overly Dedicated, possibly after Section 80.
Yeah. And the story is that Dave Free was really good at computers. And so Top had him come over to fix his computer. I don't know if he had a virus or something like that. And I believe Dave played Kendrick while he was there, and, you know, and Top was curious and, you know, had him come back with Kendrick, and kind of the rest is history. But TDE is not in any way releasing regular like product at this time. You know, it's not until 2 years later that Ab-Soul drops, and he released his long-term mixtape. And Soul is, you know, a unique MC. I still have never heard an MC like Ab-Soul, like, you know, super complex references and metaphors and, you know, really rhymes that go over a lot of people's heads. You need almost like a dictionary and, like, you know, and Wikipedia in order to like decipher what he's doing. So he brings a very different voice to TDE than J Rock and Kendrick. But were you up on Soul at this point?
Not in 2009. Somewhere around 2010, 2011, I got put onto Ab-Soul at a deeper level. And you know, Murs is one of the people that really helped put me on. Actually, Murs brought Ab-Soul and possibly Kendrick, but definitely Ab as an opening act on tour. And I may have at that point seen Ab-Soul, you know, at a paid dues or on a MERS tour, but it wasn't, it was one of those things where it didn't hit and resonate. But I agree with everything that you just said about Solo. And I also think that this isn't talked about enough because Ab does the same thing as Kendrick and kind of goes away for 4 or 5 years in a clip. But I feel like a lot of what is popular in rap right now in terms of aesthetic, in terms of defined convention, in terms of stuffing your lyrics with, very deep historical references. Ab-Soul was one of those artists that pivoted that into the zeitgeist and made it cool.
Yeah. So Long Term drops in January. In May, ScHoolboy Q joins the fold and he releases Gangster and Soul. That's a project I have not heard, but Q brings, he brings a different level of gangster. I think the thing that appeals to me the most about both him and J-Rock is that they don't glorify the things that they've seen in the streets and things that they've done. In fact, it's mournful, the music, and it's almost a cautionary tale for both of them. And so Q does that, but Q also, as menacing as his music can be, is just like one of the funniest dudes ever. Like he's always just like goofing and having a good time. I got a photo of me and him from years later on the 106 and Park set, and both of us just laughing, because he always is cracking jokes, so he brings a different dimension to TDE too. And at this point, the foursome that would become Black Hippy is complete. And it's later on in that year, December 2009, that Kendrick releases the Kendrick Lamar EP, ironically titled because it's 14 songs long and I think over an hour. So, it would be a long album, definitely an EP, but it's noteworthy because he shed the K-Dot moniker and he's become Kendrick Lamar at this point. And the music is I think the first time that you hear the MC that would grow into who he has become today. The first song, is it Love? I can't remember. That's the sample, but it's very, very introspective, and he's talking about who he is and why he's like decided to embrace himself. He talks about having mimicked other styles in the past, and like he just needs to have his own voice. And it's got songs like P and P. For those who don't know, you can look it up. My favorite song on there is Vanity Slaves. And that's where like the first time you really understand what a monster Kendrick Lamar is as a rhymer. But he's talking about how we're all slaves to materialism. And, that's the exact opposite of what you hear in rap. Rap is all about like flossing your money and cars you got and the jewelry you're wearing and stuff like that. And this is a guy who's saying that we're all slaves to vanity and materialism, and we've got to like break free. Had you heard that project at that point or no?
No, I'll admit that I hadn't. And, that was at a time where I was spending a lot of time, scrolling Two Dope Boys, NahRight, OnSmash, Cocaine Blunts. And I just remember there was a host of artists and I would make little mental notes of where were they from? Who else were they working with? What did they sound like? And for whatever reason, Kendrick Lamar was this artist that I was seeing the name on a consistent basis, but it didn't really resonate. I often feel like I'm early, but I meet so many people that were up on him, 08, 09, like we're talking about. And I think this tape definitely put him on a lot of radars for people that, really enjoy discovering tomorrow's talent.
Yeah, I didn't hear this mixtape until probably 2013, 2014. Wow. 2013. This Good Kid dropped 2012, right? I heard it 2013. I remember I was with Dave and, he had just played studio for me by ScHoolboy Q. And I was bugging because I had never heard Q sing before, and it was a completely different sound for him. The song would come out 6 months later and be a massive hit. But as I was leaving, Dave mentioned that he said that at the time was still his favorite project. And he was like bugging that I hadn't heard it. So I went back and listened to it, and I just thought it was unbelievable. And it's rare, I think, that you can go back. That's only happened to me with Prince, where you can go back into an artist's catalog prior to your entry point and really, really dig the music because it tends to be so different and raw. But for me, it was very consistent with who Kendrick was growing into as an MC, and was still one of my favorite projects to this day too.
I like what you said, and it's funny. You know, I'm a football fan. Growing up in Pittsburgh, you have to be, but I've never been a college football fan. I might watch like the bowl games. So a lot of other people know who these athletes are when their team drafts them. Like they get really excited on draft night. I don't. Like I learn who players are when they enter the league. And in a lot of ways, I feel like Kendrick's rookie season was Section 80. And it's interesting, like you look at the catalog prior to that. And I feel like maybe with every TDE artist, there's that rookie season, but there's a project or two before it. And you can go, but Kendrick is a great example, and listen and watch them developing the skills that they bring to the league. And I know exactly what you mean. And it's funny. And I think that's very much something that is now commonplace with artists. I don't think necessarily artists are getting to the level that Kendrick's at. But the next time there's a superstar, there's going to be a whole catalog of work that fans inevitably missed and can go back and watch and really learn where the growth points, or as you say, I steal this a lot, the inflection points are, you know?
Yeah, man. And, you know, I think as a rule of thumb, every overnight artist has been working for 7 years, you know, in obscurity, just like toiling and like just fighting to like be known. And, you know, once it happens, everyone thinks it was truly overnight, but they've been grinding for years.
I agree with you, but I think it has to be this case. I don't know that Lil Nas X, and I just pick him as an example. It could be Lil Tecca. It could be, you know, Doja Cat has a 7-year story, but there's artists these days, because I do a lot of their bios, and they'll be like, literally, that was the first song I made. And I don't think they're capping when they say that. But an artist like Kendrick, that has had the mission to use, you know, what he shared on Instagram this week, as Kendrick, you're right. There's always going to be a yellow brick road behind them.
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions. Lil Dicky is one too. That's a dude. We posted his video the first day it dropped, his first ever video. And that video did 1 million streams on the first day. Like he was an instant success. So there are exceptions, but I think generally, man, these guys are grinding, you know? So that album comes out. It also has BJ the Chicago Kid, and he would become extended TDE family. I think for a few years, people actually thought he was signed to TDE, and it wasn't his album Pineapple Now Letters, was that on TDE? I can't remember. No, it wasn't on TDE, but a lot of people thought it was TDE at that point.
Yeah, they've always moved with these affiliates that you've been curious about, and some of them have been other like rap peers, but it's a tight-knit circle with people. And yeah, I mean, and BJ is a great example of that too, because he was an artist that popped up on my radar, and that Pineapple Now and Laters was a phenomenal, you know, and it was one of those things of like, this is free. Like there's download links the artist is promoting, but this is also an album, and I can't run to Best Buy and buy it, but you can't tell me that this isn't competing with anyone else in the space or genre.
Yeah, I mean, BJ, man, incredible talent. So also on this, another piece that starts to fall into place with Kendrick Lamar EP is Soundwave produced 5 tracks on the album, and Soundwave would go on to become a really integral part of TDE's in-house production. He produced ADHD, Hold Up from Section 80, Mad City, Don't Kill My Vibe. He produced All Right along with Pharrell, King Kunta, and then 8 songs on Damn. So he was truly, is still truly one of Kendrick's primary muses musically. But it also showcases, so TDE, there's something we talked a little bit about, the comparison to Rawkus, but this is another way in which they really fare very well with the greatest labels of all time, and that they are built around an in-house production team for the most part. They work with others, but Digiphonics, which was, Soundwave, Willie B, Tay Beast, and Dave Free, who we'll talk about extensively, but, the guy who brought Kendrick to TDE, Kendrick's manager, one of his best friends, Lil Homies, his partner as a video producer like Dave, is a genius and was co-president of TDE ultimately as well. But it was so many labels that were built on in-house production. So you think about Def Jam with Rick Rubin, Death Row with Dre, Bad Boy with the Hitman, Cash Money with Beats with Manny Fresh, yeah. No Limit with Beats by the Pound. Rockefeller had Just and Kanye. There are just so many great labels that started with that. But why do you think that is that's such a critical part?
I think first of all, it allows to make music easily. You're not paying for all of your beats. And in the late 2000s, early 2010s, this was still an era where I don't think there were like SoundCloud type beats online. Artists were doing business. There was some exchange of some kind. And to have people that are just as hungry as the vocalists creating, there's these images of, I think it's Top's house in Carson, California, kind of in a cul-de-sac, and all of these rappers, sleeping on the couch with producers, just that creative element of side by side. I think that makes the best work versus, reaching out to somebody, waiting for discs, doing business, getting it finalized. And I remember, the stuff early on that I heard from TDE, I'd always say, well, who produced this? Like I'm waiting to hear, a name, Rick Rock, Battle Cat, whatever. And to see these names that I'd never heard of, didn't know if they were part of the fold or not. And then you see them again and again and again, and you start to learn and you pick up patterns of like, okay, Soundwave does this and Willie does that. I thought it was so dope. And it was just really interesting.
Yeah, and so musical too, and another thing that happens is that they had was also, I also think that having guys in-house just fosters a certain level of chemistry when you're living and breathing together, the whole time. You think about artists like the Dungeon Family with Outkast and Goody Mob, and those guys literally being in the same space all day
with organized
every
noise.
day. Yeah, there's just like an artistic mind meld that happens. But Derek, mixed by Ali, is also their engineer. And it's very, very rare that an engineer becomes known as he was. He's an engineer, he's a DJ for their tours. But he's reached the level of, I'd say, like a Bob Powers, who did, Erica and D'Angelo and The Roots and A Tribe Called Quest and, all the great Soulquarians music and many other things. I put him up there with Young Guru, Jay-Z's famous engineer. Dre has complimented him. He actually did Good Kid, Mad City. A lot of people thought that Dre would do it since he was signed to Aftermath, but Ali did it. Can you think of others like that, like engineers who reached that kind of level?
Before Guru entered the fold, I didn't realize until a couple weeks ago with the passing of Chucky Thompson how far back Young Guru goes. But I remember Super Producer Duro. We would see that all through the 90s on Cameron Records, and he was like DJ Clue's partner, and that was like the engineer that you always saw. And the other one that I'll say too is Eddie Sancho, who was Premier's guy at D&D. And Death Row kind of had a cast, but guys like you and I that read the liner notes. Today Eddie Sancho was the D&D guy, and he went on. Now he works with, I think, Alchemist a lot, certainly Evidence and those guys. You learn how these mixes sound differently person to person. And you're absolutely right. Derek, mixed by Ali, which I thought was such a dope name, became such a, you learn the cast of characters, and he was certainly one of them, but in a way that only the top, maybe 3% of engineers ever get to be.
Absolutely. So 2010 comes, and this is when I think TDE goes to a different level of recognition. A lot of it is fueled. We just had Mickey Fax and Blue on last week, and they were freshmen in 2007 for XXL, or 2008. And then in 2010, J-Rock is named as a XXL freshman in what some believe is maybe the greatest class of all time. That class also featured J. Cole, Wiz Khalifa, Freddie Gibbs, Big Sean, and Nipsey Hussle. And I think Charles Hamilton too. It's insane J-Rock, being part of that, and it just propels him to a different level, and also TDE with him.
Yeah, 100%. I do think Blue and Mickey were 09, as was Charlton, if I'm not mistaken, and Asher Roth and that crew. But this is a great cover. And I remember at the time being somewhat skeptical because, the cover began in 08 with, Crooked Eye and Joel Ortiz, and it was evolving. But all of these artists were, major label artists at the time. And I remember thinking, like, how much does that interplay with this? Some of them, and I can't remember with each one what they had put out. I know I was slower to the party with some more than others, but this list proves itself so well over time. You're absolutely right. Every one of these freshmen that you just mentioned graduated, for damn sure.
Yeah, for sure. And then September, Kendrick drops Overly Dedicated. And I think this is really the beginning for him when he's starting to create quite a buzz for himself. I'm seeing his name in a lot of places, and it coincides with what I think is the prime, if not, it's probably the early to mid part of the prime for the blog era, and it's sites too, but like everyone referred to any hip hop online site as a blog pretty much at that point. And the key sites were NahRight, which was always one of my favorites. Salute to SK, really an originator and this game. Yeah. Two Dope Boys, Mecca and Shake, who I know and still to this day a critical influencer. Rap Radar, Elliot Wilson, Hip Hop DX, this guy Jake Payne was holding them down. And XXL, Pigeon and Planes, and then OnSmash too. So, Kendrick is now on all of those sites regularly. I still wasn't fully into the music because I literally just had a foolish, like superficial reaction. Like I pulled a Jake Payne and I thought his name sounded too R&B. And I'm like, Kendrick Lamar, that's like an R&B name. This dude can't rhyme. Like, so I still wasn't fully checking for it yet. But I gotta imagine you were covering him at this point. Is that right?
At this point, no. I mean, so little bit of context. Andreas Hale, who later went to BET and is now, one of the top, MMA and boxing correspondents and has his own podcast. He was back and forth between Vegas and LA. And before I arrived at Hip Hop DX, Dre was the editor in chief. And he had that site looking so tight, especially for the LA underground. So artists like Blue, Tyron, Kendrick, Fashawn, who I know is from Fresno, like those guys were getting a lot of love on that site. And the music director of that site was Shake, who went on to become one of the Two Dope Boys, one of our top bloggers, and also somebody who was, writing reviews and news pieces and features was Mecca. Those guys in 2009, in I believe February of 2008, start Two Dope Boys as a side project of like, yo, there's only so many hours in a day. There's this guy, Jake Payne, who, wants to cover things this way, and maybe we don't have enough room for the unsigned or whatever. And I'm kind of joking with that, but they started this blog that became right up there, most influential music blogs of all time, beyond hip hop. And I really think when you talk about TDE and you talk about Kendrick, all the names that you mentioned are very valuable, but I really think a special few steps up the ladder is Two Dope Boys, because Shake was in Vegas, Mecca was in LA at the time. They were very aware of what was going on in the streets, and also, I mean, this was, I guess, right around the time of Twitter and in the tweets, and they knew how to cover these projects in a way that an established site like a DX or an All Hip Hop or a XXL isn't going to be able to. So I see the name more and more. I'm sure that Shake and Kathy Ondely, who replaced Shake as the music editor at the site, I'm sure we were, getting looks, but it wasn't something that was in my face and on my radar. And I'll admit that. A lot of those other folks that are in that 2000 list were, just like J-Rock, I'm one of the first people to cover Wiz in any capacity. We have the same hometown. But yeah, man, I still am going to kind of throw out a late pass. I was a little tardy.
Yeah, man. Salute to Two Dope Boys for sure, because I remember seeing TDE in general and especially Kendrick all over that site in 2010. This is when I was just starting out with AFH, doing it, a couple days a week, and seeing if I could make any traction. And incidentally, going back to the conversation about the importance of labels, it was in September of 2010 that I challenged myself to see if I could actually write an article every day. If there was enough material to cover something daily. And so the first thing that I did was I counted down the 25 greatest record labels of all time. And certainly Rawkus was on that. And number one was Def Jam. I think I had Death Row and then Bad Boy.
Tommy Boy's
there's like 2 and 3. Tommy Boy was on there for sure.
House, yeah.
Yeah, Cold Chillin'. Had a bunch of them, but TDE would certainly make that list now, and we'll get into that in a minute. But so 2011 comes, and this is when TDE really fully transitions from mixtapes to albums. So in January, you talk about this, J-Rock. Talk about J-Rock. What happened?
So this was interesting, and this is absolutely. I mean, in 2009, 2010, J-Rock is making music. He does a video with Lil Wayne. But like you say with Kendrick, he's figuring out his voice, his position, what he represents. And in January, J-Rock is photographed in the studio with Dr. Dre. And this has kind of become a rap cliche. I mean, we've covered it sometimes on Ambrosia for Heads when, Dre and LL Cool J, of course, working on an album. Dre and KRS-One, who had worked together some years ago, back working together. But, Dre goes to the studio every day. And if you're lucky enough, I just saw it recently. We even shared it on the AFH Instagram account. Diamond D and Dre were together in the studio. I think Exhibit brought Diamond to the lab. But it meant a lot with J-Rock. And for the reasons that I think I mentioned a little bit ago, Dre has been the kingmaker on the West Coast. So when he was knighting new talent, it really meant something. And the fact that he was aware of J-Rock after the success that Dre has had with, The Game and Nocturnal and Exhibit and, other folks out there, it really meant something. And I remember that. And this was before, artists were taking photos day in and day out. It meant something. We covered it on DX and everyone was speculating, is J-Rock gonna make this situation with Aftermath, or is Dre gonna help him at Warner? What did it all mean? And that was really cool for J-Rock.
Yeah. And then in March, Kendrick joins J-Rock as a XXL freshman. And his class is not too shabby either. He's got Meek Mill, Big Crit, Sahai the Prince, Yellow Wolf, Fred the Godson, Mac Miller, YG, and Lil B, the bass god. So, and more. So, Kendrick is definitely making a name for himself as well. ScHoolboy Q and Ab Soul release projects. Long-term mentality for Soul, which is really one that's widely regarded by his fans, and then Setback for Q. And then in June, Hood Gon' Love It, J-Rock's single comes out, and produced by the Justice League, man, still one of my favorite tracks of all time. Those violins, the drums are just huge on it.
It's one of my favorite beats, yeah.
It's incredible, just absolutely incredible. And Justice League was doing like Aston Martin music for Rick Ross, and they were in luxury tax for Lil Wayne. It was, they were just killing the game at that point, So that song comes out, and it features Kendrick in the video, and it's a really breakout verse for Kendrick. And that's around when he starts to really penetrate for a lot of people, myself included. So when that came out, he's fully on your radar at that point, right?
Yeah. That summer, I'm in KC for a weekend, and Kendrick has a verse on Tech Nine's All Sixes and Sevens album, which still this day is my favorite Strange Music release. He's got this breakout verse, and I'm not going to say he eclipsed J-Rock on that joint. What I thought was so brilliant is you talk a lot about, pitches and tonality. They sound so different. Their flows are different on the song. And it's, J-Rock had some hitters on that album. Like, he had some guests. And at that
Wayne.
point,
Wayne was on the album.
He's worked with Wayne a couple of times. And that album, even though Strange Music put it out, it was a lot of material that he had been chipping away at over the previous 3 years at Warner. but it's a breakout summer. You got Double XL, you got these two verses, and then you're going to talk about it. One of the true diamonds in the TDE discography.
Yeah. Well, so before I get into that, I'm gonna say just a piece on Kendrick. So for me, that song, January of 2011 is when he really was on my radar. There's a song released by Terrace Martin with a crazy Stevie Wonder sample, which I won't name, but it features Terrace rapping, and Terrace can rap, and then Sci-Hi blacking out, and Kendrick too. The song is called Thirsty, and just unreal. Still one of my, I send it to you, song of the day, probably once every quarter or something like that. But that is when I was like, oh, this dude Kendrick Lamar is nice. And so by the time June comes around and Hood Gonna Love It happens, I'm all in on the Kendrick. I'm fully on the Kendrick bandwagon at this point. And Kendrick drops a couple of he says boldly he's the gift of the future on that rap. And, we have no idea how true that saying is going to become. But then he says good kid, mad city on it. And, very similar to Reason with New Beginnings coming. He dropped a hint to us of what was coming. But so Rock's, but before that happens though, he drops still one of my favorite albums of all time. I personally believe that Kendrick has 4 classics, starting with this one, Section 80. Section 80 comes out. The song ADHD, as soon as I heard that, man, the chords, seeing the video had nothing to do with the song. It was recorded in Johnny Shipes' office. Did you know that?
Damn, I didn't. Either you told me that or somebody else. Maybe Shipes told me that himself. That's wild. I did not realize that. No.
You want to tell people who Shipes is?
Yeah, founder of Cinematic Entertainment and person who introduced me to Nipsey Hussle in 2005, 2006. Just a really good dude. I still do a lot of work for his company today.
Yeah, Cinematic Music Group. He had Big Crit, Smoke DZA, a lot of people.
T-Pain, Cameron. I mean, they've also become a company that artists go well into their careers. And now, I mean, they're killing it with Youngin Ace and, Lost Soldier and Big Yevo. And they're really taking markets like Jacksonville and Alabama and putting it on. And their GM is a good friend of mine too, Chris Hershey, and just a phenomenal company that's empowered artists. And you'll never see an artist speak ill of Cinematic like that. Mick Jenkins is another artist that's been with them a long time. Joey Badass, I don't even know if he said that. Joey.
I actually interviewed Joey and Pro Era, the whole crew, and in the Cinematic office where ADHD was shot. Back when Joey was 15, 16, something like that. He was a little kid. It was crazy. But so Cinematic and TDE were tight at this point. And so they just shot the ADHD video there. There was Kush and Corinthians on that album, Rigor Mortis.
Poe Man's Dreams, a song that can affect me emotionally. Ultimately one of my favorite songs, High Powered, produced by J. Cole, who's another artist of the moment. I think it's J. Cole's top 3 beat of his all time, and Kendrick just destroys it, comes late at the album. The Ronald Reagan era, there are so many joints on that album.
Yeah, High Power, because of that Cole collaboration for years, people would speculate that he and Kendrick were going to make a joint album. And they fueled the fire for a little bit, but unfortunately that hasn't happened yet. Going back to Poe Man's Dreams, it affected me emotionally too. And to the point where when my son was accepted into college, that's the first song I played, and I hit Dave after that and let him know and asked him to, thank Kendrick for me. And, he said he would. So, man, just a lot of great songs. And that Rigor Mortis, though, was the song where Kendrick was just cutting heads, just that was his, I can rap song. And later on, it got a remix with Busta Rhymes. Remember that?
Yo, I had forgotten that, but I sure do now. Yeah. I mean, to me, you said 4 classics. I wholeheartedly agree. To me, this is Kendrick's rookie season. And I one of my pet peeves of, the semantics debate of mixtape versus album. You know, calling to Pimp a Butt, or excuse me, to call Good Kid, M.A.A.d City a debut is such an injustice to this album, because even though it was never on physical copy, I bought one, and TDE was mailing out, you know, like computer printed CDRs that if you ran your finger, you could scratch off the text in a cheap plastic thing with the liner notes. Actually, I think I bought it off Mecca because he had like an extra one from Two Dope Boys, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been Shake. But you know, this album epitomizes the blog era and its fullest potential. You know, an artist can make an album that is readily available for free and it can compete. This is 2011. To me, this is a better album than Watch the Throne. I've always said that. I know that that may upset people, but to me, that is how I remember that year.
Yeah, I agree.
And, you know,
I agree
it's great.
fully. And I knew that he was a special talent at this point. Like there was just no denying it. And because I was doing AFH the whole time I was at BET, it basically served as like a funnel, like an A&R source for me, you know. And so I was up on Kendrick sooner than most people in the building were, and because of that, really was able to forge a relationship with them and help establish them in the building. And so I remember distinctly the day that the Cypher was taped, and this was like, I think September of 2011. It was the first time I met Kendrick and Dave. They came, sat in my office, and you know, I was joking with Kendrick. I was like, "Yo, you work hard, right?" I said, "Some people might think you're a little overly dedicated," and you know, they cracked a smile at my dad joke. You know,
Cool rap dad
yeah,
joke though. Yeah.
yeah. You know, and you know, later on at the Cypher, it was raining that day too. And got a call. Hey, you know, this is Dave. You know, can you let them know that we're down here? That they don't know who we are. And like that is just so telling. You know, like they were so new to the game that people didn't even realize, you know, who they were. And then they went up, and Kendrick, of course, killed it. That was the first of like 3 ciphers he did. He did like 3 ciphers in a row, something crazy like that. But we'll get into that in a minute. But you know, at that point now, I am becoming a serious advocate for Kendrick in the building. You know, I'm very passionate about him, a huge fan of not only him, but all of TDE, Rock, Q, Absol, all those dudes like are incredibly talented to me. And I am on a mission. And I have vehicles like the Backroom Freestyle, which, you know, Stephen Hill, who was my boss at the time, let me program, just gave me the freedom to like run with that. And so I had all those guys. You know, actually, Kendrick recorded the first ever Backroom Freestyle, but Q recorded his on the same day, and we released Q's first, I
Oh
believe. So he was the
wow.
first to air. But you know, I'm in full motion at BT, and it sounds like you and I, even though you and I didn't know each other, we were already working together in a similar path. So tell me about what you were doing at DX.
I mean, yeah, that was an interesting year, because 2010 was Kanye's, you know, Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and that album, you know, ran the table. And I was just talking about it yesterday. That's the album that I remember 2010 by that and by Crit Was Here. You know, on the mixtape level, 2 very different projects in just terms of where they lived in the consciousness of the world. 2011 was so interesting because the whole year comes, you have Watch the Throne, which is this just diamond encrusted album. Literally, it's artwork at a high level. And Otis Forever is a great song. But to me, you know, what's that expression everyone says now? You know, say the quiet part loud. I looked at it and I felt a responsibility to hip hop to say the quiet part really loud. And this is, I also think this is a time of social media clout chasing and everything else. And to me, Kendrick Lamar hands down made the best album that year with Section 80. And, you know, and also, I mean, long-term mentality was a rookie. Like this whole movement is really galvanizing right now and getting really interesting. And I am at what I consider to be, you know, apart from World Star, which is a video site, the largest hip hop news site on the web. And we're doing a really good job. We have a big staff, a lot of pressure, a lot of headaches, a lot of fires. But I wanted that year to give this kid from Compton his flowers for making an album that you couldn't even grab at Best Buy. And it's always been a democratic process, but we've as a staff, we've, sort of like what you and I have done at times with Ambrosia, we'll kind of put together the possibilities and then just see if a staff echoes it. But that year, that was the album of the year for us. And the album of the year meant something in 2011, especially from a site like that. And if you don't choose somebody as album of the year, you could potentially, affect a relationship. We've all heard stories of Wale, flipping out at Complex or flipping out at DX. And, we gave Kendrick his flowers, and it wasn't politically at all. It wasn't political at all. I think at the time, it was, we didn't stand a lot to gain by that, but I'm really proud of that decision. And when I look at my 20 years in this game, those times where I've raised my voice or really, put down for somebody that I felt was deserving and maybe not a cloud chaser, I'm really, really, really proud of that legacy. Much like you, and you're doing it on a really, really high level with television too, because, what other network is putting ScHoolboy Q and Kendrick on, not just to sit on a couch or to be on for 3 minutes, but to rap, to do what they love.
Yeah,
huge.
man. And I was doing it on the AFH side too. In addition to covering them in articles, I also did my first interview with Kendrick at this point. So it was, I think, October of 2011. It was after he did a show, and it was late as hell. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I go back to his hotel. I think it was the Royalton or something like that. And my camera guy and I are in the lobby, and Kendrick is really tired, but he turns it on. Those dudes are just such professionals. And I did a series called Where It All Began. It's still up on YouTube. I did it with him and Rhapsody and Big Crit and Styling and a bunch of other people. But I asked them the same 5 questions. What's the first piece of music you bought with your own money? Who was your first favorite MC? What's the first time you experienced hip hop live and in the flesh? Who brought you to hip hop? And when did you know this is when you wanted to be, what you wanted to do for your career? And it was then that, Kendrick was talking to me about DMX and how DMX filled the void that Tupac left. And, this powerful words he has for X, rest in peace. He talks about being at the shoot, which is now a very famous story, but he talked about that early on with me, about being at that California Love shoot with Snoop and Dre. And, it was just really, I remember being so amped to be able to get that footage, because I knew he was going to be special. And he shouts out AFH and he says, "Y'all better tune in," which, we use now for a lot of our stuff. But yeah, so yeah, I'm really forging that relationship with TDE at this point too. So on both levels. So 2012 comes, and now it's just clear to everyone that this is a juggernaut label to be reckoned with. So Q releases Habits and Contradictions in January to set the year off. And a lot of people believe still that this is his best album. I think I'd probably go, that. You believe that? Yeah, I think I would go Oxymoron, but I'm not going to fight you on this. Like, it's got There You Go and Hands on the Wheel with A$AP Rocky. My Hating Joint, produced by Mike Will, which is crazy. Groove Line with like Dom Kennedy and Currency. Blessed, produced by Dave Free, uses an insane sample, and that features Kendrick. Very, very powerful song. Probably my favorite Q song of all time. But I know this album was special for you. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I always look at years in music as seasons, and, to watch to watch a Pippen and Jordan like this, and that's not to discredit J-Rock, but all of a sudden, as new artists, that I guess that is not the best analogy, to watch TDE do it with 2 different artists in 2011, and then boom, come with 12 with Q on another just kind of sneak attack album, like no hype machine around it, no fanfare. I mean, this is pre-Instagram of like, yo, I'm gonna drop. It just came. And to see some of these names involved, to see Alchemist involved, to see it, was a sacrilegious, crazy joint. Album is insane. And Stephen Horowitz, who's now at TikTok, was our news editor, and he was such a strong advocate of this album. And I remember coming into 2012 and thinking, well, wow, TDE is really, really competing in a way that, I'm not sure other labels are, to be this good, this fast, And only at this time, J-Rock is the only one that has any major backing him. And it wasn't even a major at that point. It was strange. So yeah, it just starts to look like, you know, an all-star team. How about that, of emerging voices?
Word. And so March comes, and I had been putting together a panel for BET for South by Southwest. The panel was moderated by TJ Holmes, you know, the reporter who was working with us at BET at the time, and is now Good Morning America. I'm sure a lot of people know him. It featured Kevin Liles, you know, former president of Def Jam, president of and CEO of 300, like just a super OG in the game. Tatiana Simonian, who was the head of Twitter Music at that time. Jana Fleischman, who was the PR person, the head of PR for Rock Nation, and a partner to Jay-Z and many things. Myself and Kendrick, you know, and so the night before, I'd had the guys come up to my room, and I interviewed Kendrick, Q, J-Rock, and Soul, like all four members of Black Hippy. Shout out to Ray Alba. You know, this is a celebration of everybody who's been a part of this. You know, shout out to him who was doing press for at least for Aftermath, but I think for I think and Interscope, and maybe for TDE generally. But like, you know, he hooked it up, and you know, so I interviewed those guys there, and afterwards we went downstairs, and Nardwuar was interviewing Kendrick. And so I stood in the room and watched that unfold. When that was a head trip, seeing Nardwuar, because he's just in person, he's just like he is in the interviews. And for those who look at that interview closely, I'll make a cameo, because he pans the room, has his camera guy pan the room at one point, and you see me in the background real quick there. But that was a highlight, man. And I say that because I want it to be a placeholder for how much things would change within a year, you know. So in March of 2012, you know, I have these guys come to my room to interview them, and we'll get to March of 2013 in a minute. But like the change that was coming was seismic, like shifting. So May, you want to talk about Ab-Soul's album?
Yeah, Ab-Soul comes with what I consider to be his second, you know, like true album, Control System, and I think this, you know, for Ab is probably my favorite. And it's really unconventional. You know, he has Terrorist Threats with Danny Brown and Janae Koo, Pineal Gland, and my song, and I recently sent this to you as a song of the day, Illuminate. And what's crazy is just the self-conviction that Ab has. Because even at this time, I mean, you look at what the previous year has been, and Ab, you know, of the four, starts to seem like the underdog, because J-Rock dropped, you know, Kendrick gets all of this praise in 2011, and then boom, beginning of 12, you got Q, and Ab-Soul more than delivered. But you know, there's his lyrics in Illuminate, but he says, so you can take your top 5 list, dead or alive, and put me after M. And that was some KRS-One shit, to like come in and just like do that. I love that. And then he has another line that blew me away at a time when, you know, you talk about TDE using, you know, Johnny Shipe's office, and, you know, we know that there's, you know, that Jay-Z pays attention to everything. And, you know, he said, I used to want to rap like Jay-Z. Now I feel like I'm running laps around Jay-Z. Nas ain't seen nothing this nasty. Like, Ab-Soul came out with the gall, like, to do that. But I listened to that song, and it has, it's not on, and I'm not, this is not a week to be sample snitching, but I am very convinced that that song has an uncredited sample to a 1980s, you know, pop hit. And it was just so different. Everything about it. I have this memory of driving a rental car through the desert in Arizona and just listening to that again and again and again. And at this point, man, I'm online. I'm trying to get a TD hoodie. You know, I'm not wearing hats in 2012, but I want a TD hat. These guys are just insane. And Ab, like Kendrick, like J-Rock, not as much Q, but he's not a guy that runs to the spotlight. But yet he has these bars that get everyone talking. And, you know, it's sort of like we recently said about Jadakiss naming an album top 5 dead or alive. even though Jadakiss's best days, in my opinion, came recently, and with hopefully more to come, no one told Jadakiss he was wrong. And at that point, I don't think anybody thought Ab-Soul was crazy for bars like that. He just really believed he was that dude. And that was a song on, with Kendrick Lamar. So what's that tell you?
Yeah, man. And another standout thing from that album for me was the Black Lip Bastard remix. That featured Kendrick, Q, and J-Rock, one of like several joints that was all four of them. And that would fuel rumors that there was going to be a Black Hippy full project. Again, which never materialized. Part of me still holds out hope that even with TDE, with Kendrick leaving TDE, that's something that even if it's 10, 12, 15 years down the road, I think that would be amazing. But that song just kind of like lets you know the promise of what that project would sound like, because they all just killed it. And TDE,
is that your favorite? Sorry to interrupt, but is that your favorite Black Hippy posse cut?
No, it's a remix that they did. It's not to that part. I'll think of it.
Okay.
But they did a remix later on, like 3 years later, that was just Kendrick blacked out on it and Rock blacked out on it. It was just incredible. But so that's another thing that TDE though did that all the great labels of the past did as well, which they featured their artists on multiple songs of each artist project, always exposing them to each other's fan bases and keeping it going. And, so that summer, we did a Music Matters. Music Matters was our emerging artist platform. We did our first ever Music Matters tour, and it featured all of Black Hippy. So Kendrick, Q, Rock, Soul, and also Stally. Stally was kind of like the odd man out, but that was their first ever national tour, I believe. It was like 23 cities, something like that.
I went to it, man. I didn't even know you.
Oh, they were? Yeah. I went to the one at Terminal 5. I think that was in October. You went in Philly?
Yeah, which was also October. And what was crazy is, packed house, absolutely captivated crowd in Philly. If you're not the Roots or Meek Mill or Freeway, it can be a hard city to win over. Was captivated. And I had seen Kendrick at a Brooklyn hip hop festival perform possibly in 2010, possibly in 2011. I'd have to look or ask Wes, but Kendrick came on early in the day as people are like milling around drinking beer, like introducing himself to the crowd. This was like headliner status. It was crazy. And I think the night that I went, Q was there, but he didn't perform. And what I've come to realize is, didn't you tell me Q got a nasty cold on that tour?
He didn't. Kendrick lost his voice on the tour.
Okay.
At one point. You might be thinking of the South by Southwest story.
Oh yeah.
So I'll tell you, so they also did a performance at South by Southwest, and Q had been performing all day and he was just exhausted. And he went backstage, came in and like threw up. He was just so sick. And I thought he was going to have to not be able to perform. He looked like he was dying. It was incredible. And I asked David if he was okay. He's like, yo, he'll be all right. And I was like, okay. And so he then, like, as soon as he hits the stage, he comes out, he's jumping up and down. He's got so much energy. You wouldn't believe it. You would think this guy was like, and it just showed me what a professional he is and just how much heart he has, So yeah, just an incredible performer and dedication, So so that's September and October, but October is a huge month for TDE and Kendrick specifically. So at the BET Awards, October 9th, Kendrick is named Hip Hop Lyricist of the Year. And then 2 weeks later, Good Kid, Mad City drops on October 22nd. Now, he had previewed that in New York in September. And I went to the preview party. It was in the studio. I say it's probably like 70, 80 people. It was raining like cats and dogs, just like hurricane-like weather. But people showed up. And man, he didn't play the album in order. He played, I think he played, he didn't play Shireen. I think he played, I can't remember what he played first, but the second song he played was Backseat Freestyle. And that was like when you heard, Kendrick have a dream, Martin have a dream, it's like, whoa, like, and we all left thinking, man, this is going to be crazy, but nothing prepared us for hearing the album in order with the skits and hearing the story unfold and the concept. It was just, I remember listening to it on headphones in the dark, because when I really want to zone out and hear something, I'll do that. And just it blew me away. I'd heard Swimming Pools over the summertime, and The Recipe, which was the first single. Recipe didn't blow me away. I was a bit disappointed, especially since Dre was on it. Swimming Pools is when I said, okay, here we go. But hearing those songs in the context of the album completely changed them for me. And Kendrick came to 106 in Park a couple days later, and I went to Best Buy beforehand and bought Good Kid, Mad City on CD. I think it may be the last CD I ever purchased. And I bought it because I wanted him to sign it for me. And I have it to this day on my wall, like, framed, because it meant that much to me, man, just to have, because I knew what a special artist he was at that point and how special the album was going to be. So yeah, I was in full fandom nerd mode at that point.
That's what's up. I mean, I remember that album dropping very well. And everyone expected Dre to have such a presence on it. During this time between 2011 and 2012, Kendrick formally signs to Aftermath, something that, again, people had speculated would happen with J-Rock and didn't. And it happened with Kendrick. And, Top Dawg has known Dre and known a lot of these people through life and through the way, the communities in LA work. But, at that time, everyone is just like, yo, what's Kendrick going to sound like if he gets this crazy Dre production? Because we also all remember The Game and documentary. Album comes out, Dre doesn't produce a single song, and no one seems to care. It's like Cole without the features. Like, Kendrick took this thing that I feel like in a lot of ways had been bastardized of like, oh, who produced what? And just made a great ass album and delivered it. And for me, I just remember the title track, the title transition tracks. And to me, to hear Mad City for the first time was such an affirmation of my love of West Coast hip hop and gangster rap. And to hear MC8, who is not the Dre, who is not the Snoop, but somebody who people know, you and I have had him on this podcast, one of my favorite episodes, is so integral to that sound and to what Compton means as an identity. And to put him in that moment, for years, that was the most streamed Kendrick Lamar song on Spotify, never got a video, was never formally shopped as a single. And it's still a classic record among Kendrick Lamar fans. And that album just blew me away because there were so many different pockets of it existing in the world. Swimming Pools, Mad City, Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe. And yet it's a really cohesive album from the way it's sequenced, to your point.
Yeah, he played Mad City at that listening party, and they didn't give us a heads up as to who was featured on what songs, and so hearing Drake on Poetic Justice was like a mind blower. But when you heard MC8's voice come on and it changed and it became that really menacing beat, it was like, holy shit, the whole energy in the room changed, man. It was just unreal. Like, yeah. So Kendrick, now this takes him to a completely different level at this point. Like, I remember driving around New York City, and I'm sure this has happened since, but I couldn't remember hearing an album being played more out of a car since like Life After Death, since Biggie died. Like, it was that prevalent. It was everywhere. At a time where you didn't hear music like blaring out of cars like you used to. So, and I'll go back to that South by Southwest story because this is the point I really wanted to make, is that this is the first person that I was with who I knew before and after and went through the transition of them becoming famous, like all caps famous, and I knew it really crystallized for me 6 months later when Kendrick performed at Roseland. It was a storied venue. in the 50s in Manhattan. It held like, 5,000 people, something like that. He sold it out twice in one night. And again, I don't know what it is with his events, but it was pouring raining and people lined up around the entire block. And Manhattan blocks in Midtown are huge, but the line went around the entire block twice for this show. It was general admission. So people were lining up in order to get, a good position. But then I was like, holy shit, this dude is famous. Like, it was wild. And, it only kept going up from there.
Month after the album dropped, I went to a Clippers game at the Staples Center, and Kendrick and Top Dawg were sitting there with Steve Berman from Interscope Records, and who plays Jerry Heller in the F with Dre Day video. And like 5 seats down was Wale. Kendrick and Wale, dapped it up, but throughout the entire game, Wale had been around, a minute. M.A.A.d Music Group had a moment, earlier than this, like 2 or 3 years earlier. And, but this is hometown, and people would not, to the point where the Staples Center had to get 3 or 4 security guards behind just so Kendrick and Top could enjoy the game. And I thought that was so interesting. This is a month after, his major label debut. And that speaks to your point very much.
Mm. He was on SNL in January too, for the first time, January of 2013, and that's always kind of like an anointment too, and so, but it's in August that, or actually in June, he performed at the BET Awards. He performed with Erica, Don't Kill My Vibe. I had a little hand in that. And that's when I got the greatest picture of my life. I have a picture of myself in between Kendrick and Erica. And, arguably my 2 favorite artists of all time. The only other one who would be in that boat is probably Prince. But to have a shot like that was just, I was done. Like I'm good, like
you're talking about the remix, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about Kendrick and Erica performing together, the actual song on the BET Awards. Yeah. So I was at the rehearsal and I got a pic with them. But in August of 2013, something else crazy happens. It takes Kendrick again to a different level. You want to talk about that?
Control, man. It was right around this time of year. I remember I was driving back from Raleigh, North Carolina, and you were like, yo, this song, we got to cover it. And I had taken a little vacation, something I wasn't always able to do with DX. And you and I mean, we've been working together at this point for like 6 weeks, and Control comes out. And it's, this song that's a Big Sean song featuring Kendrick Lamar and Jay Electronica. I mean, 3 heavy hitters together. And, Kendrick has a verse that makes Ab-Soul's verse on Illuminate look bashful, of just coming at the game and really in a way that I don't know if rap has ever seen before, but being like, to use an illustration, you say, I'm on this spot, take it from me, move me off this mountain. And it, at a time when, you mentioned the pinnacle of blog era, at a time when I think rap was figuring out how to excite the media. I cannot think of a more exciting thing in 2013 than that Control verse. And it's to a song that has still never been formally released, that the way that it was in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, news cycles at this point are 2 days max, for almost anything, 3 days. And this was in the hip hop news and actually pop culture news for 2 weeks. Like people were talking about it endlessly. And there was, you probably remember, like an endless stream of people responding to him, Papoose and probably like 20 other people. Kendrick said that, Kendrick said that King Los he thought was the best response to him. But Kendrick in the verse put himself in the conversation with Nas, Eminem, Andre 3000, and Jay-Z. And then he told J. Cole, Big Crit, Wale, Drake, Pusha T, Meek Mill, Mac Miller, Tyler the Creator, A$AP Rocky, Jay Electronica, and Big Sean that he was trying to murder them. He named names, and like it was unreal, just the competitiveness. And it was a moment. I was watching watching Royce and Mickey in their first IG Live, and Royce was talking about verses that changed culture. And at the top of his list, it seemed to be Black Thought's freestyle from Hot 97 a few years ago with Flex. But he referenced Kendrick's Control verse as one of those verses too. And it was unreal. It was just absolutely unreal.
I mean, deeper than that too. I mean, we at that point, I think hip hop is used to beefs. There's beefs every day in the news cycle of who's got a problem with who. And this kind of, again, was a bring back not only to the battles of the early 90s and the 80s, but also the battles that existed in schoolrooms, in lunch tables, in parks, in park jams, and how many ciphers. Like, Kendrick is a hip hop purist, and this was just a super authentic move that, I mean, you know, you talk about Kendrick's sense of humor and jokey side. This is like a, hey, you know, like match me, like we're gonna play horse, but we're gonna do it on the highest level of emceeing. And I think that is, again, at a really weird time. I mean, this is the same summer of, you know, Kanye and Mac Miller and J. Cole all dropping on the same day in June. This is a guy that is just making everyone around him, you know, step it up, sort of like Versus, you know, like, yo, let's make this fun again. And that's what it did. But I also know that, you know, Big Sean might not have seen it that way.
Yeah, I mean, there were some implications. As much as it propelled Kendrick and, like you said, fueled competitiveness, Big Sean felt away because it was his record. And, you know, he knew the verse was on there. I mean, he released it, you know, but I don't think he expected it to have the reaction that it did. And in a lot of ways, people just thought it was Kendrick Lamar's song, and he was completely forgotten. And so, you know, they had a split that wasn't really healed until seemingly maybe like a year or two ago, like, you know, based on Big Sean's verse recently. And then it also rubbed Drake the wrong way. You know, Drake had brought Kendrick and I think Cole too, or, you know, or A$AP Rocky on tour with him.
Club Paradise tour.
Yeah, the Club Paradise tour, when Drake was popping and before these guys got to the levels that they got to. And he saw it as an affront, you know, that, you know, Kendrick would say that about him, even though, you know, it was all fun and games, you know, given how he'd helped to put him on. And so, you know, despite their having collaborated on Poetic Justice and then on Take Care or Marvin's Room, you know, they would never work together again, you know, and I don't know, I still don't know if it's all good, you know, so it definitely changed things for them. But that wasn't the end of the story. You know, Kendrick built on that control and doubled down with arguably the greatest Cypher verse of all time. This is October now. And, you know, TDE had their Cypher. I was there, and it was incredible because they had done it in a way where there was no break, you know, and each one would finish and pass off to the other one, like on that word, almost like EPMD trading verses on Nas on the Nas song. And it was just so fresh. Kendrick did an intro, you know, and then, you know, J-Rock and Q and Soul and Isaiah Rashad did the heavy lifting. And so it was Isaiah Rashad's introduction to the world for most people. Most people didn't know who he was. SZA was also in the background, and no one knew who she was either. So again, this is TDE being incredibly strategic. They knew what a powerful vehicle the Hip Hop Awards were, and the Cyphers especially. So they were rolling out their new artists, you know, on a national stage like that. And you know, everyone else had like I think a James Brown breakbeat, but we gave TDE the Shook Ones beat. And Keno, who was a great friend of mine, has managed Royce for years, was working with Slaughterhouse, and a lot of people were seeing TDE and Slaughterhouse as like, you know, that would be a dope versus, right? Like, but people saw that because they both were going to have ciphers, and people saw it as the TDE versus Slaughterhouse cipher.
Oh, wow.
And like Keno and I had a friendly bet. And I was like, I took TDE. Of course, he took his guys, you know. But after that, man, when Kendrick's verse is like he's possessed. He's called himself, you know, Master Splinter, and like, you know, he references control and like, ha ha, jokes on you, like I'm bulletproof, like he just snaps, goes crazy, and like it really, really it stole the show. Literally, it took the whole night. Now, what most people don't know is that verse almost didn't happen. It was Kendrick's intention not to really rap in the Cypher. He came, he did the intro, and he wanted to let his guys shine. You know, he wanted to like kind of stand in the background. And we were like, yo, like, are you gonna do a verse? And so then he did the verse, and it ended up being, like I said, that one of the greatest verses in Cypher history. And so, but that was unreal. That was magic.
Man, checking all the boxes.
Yeah, checked all the boxes. What was your reaction when you saw that?
I remember, I mean, you were obviously there, and I remember that night because I had to get home to cover it real time. And I remember you and I were newly working together as far as Ambrosia. That's your baby. I'm kind of like the babysitter on the big night out. And, I remember being very locked in the moment. And it wasn't until, like a day or so later of really appreciating the glory of that. And I think it's funny too. I mean, I'm being a little bit jokey with the checking the boxes, but Kendrick has these incredible verses. You mentioned the Terrace Martin joint, or I think a Cartoon and Cereal, that are not, in the traditional catalog. They just kind of exist if you know where to find them. And I think that, that's like the Banksy of that's such a corny comparison, but he puts Easter eggs out there that are not always under your nose and not always reduced to an album or a feature. And that moment for him was crazy. And to our bigger point, what it said about TDE, bringing Isaiah into the spotlight at that moment, SZA's in the background, like this crew's moving like the way you want your friends to move. Like, and that's just so inspiring at a time when over the last, 10 years, I think we've all seen the pettiness that comes with labels and business and all of that. And TDE made it look like, like Naughty by Nature in 91 or 2 of like, yo, we mob deep, like we move this way. And I just think and it translates to the art.
Word. So at this point, TDE has established itself as probably, I think, the number one label. You had Shady with Slaughterhouse. You had MMG, and this is at Ross and Wale and Stally Point and Meek Mill. So they were formidable too. But I think TDE at this point was like on top, and now they're rolling out new artists. So in 2014, Isaiah drops the Sylvia demo EP, and that's very widely regarded. And then April, SZA drops her Z EP. So now they're showcasing new levels, and with SZA, they're showing they can actually do more than hip hop too. Now they're not just Def Jam. They're Bad Boy. They're Motown. They're showcasing variety, and so. But they had some setbacks too. In February, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I remember that night very well. And in February of that year, Kendrick is robbed of the, best rap album at the Grammys. Hip hop was super duper upset. Memes are going wild because that award went to Macklemore and Ryan Lewis for the heist.
Yeah,
I never put that together until right now,
yeah,
but it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
And it was also the same night that Kendrick puts this, absolutely epic, and that's not a word I use often, performance with Imagine Dragons, which is not necessarily the Kendrick that me, your meat and potatoes hip hop guy, wants to see. But you can't tell me. I mean, I just had a text with some friends recently over the greatest rap performances in the modern TV era, like i.e. since Y2K. And that was on my top 5 list. Like that joint is crazy, and he sold it. And it was just, this is also coming at a time when hip hop is talking a lot in new ways about cultural appropriation, about, racism behind institutions. And, it was a very, very weird night. And yeah, you were in the building, right?
I was in the building, man. And I was in shock when Macklemore won the award. It truly blew me away. But then when he did perform, I was like, wow, this is unreal. He did the mashup with Imagine Dragons for Radioactive and Mad City. And it was just, and I think I was texting you, the headline was like, something like Macklemore won the Grammy, but Kendrick Lamar wins the night, something like that.
Yeah.
But it was incredible. And afterwards, I went to an after party TDE had, and I saw him, and I just said, look, you will win others. I know this, and that was definitely true. It was definitely coming, but I think that was news for a few days too. Everyone was just blown away by that.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big season though for TDE, because that same month, ScHoolboy Q releases Oxymoron, and it was their first album as a label, or first album in 18 months.
Yeah, first one in 18 months. It had been a while.
And you had said a moment ago that might be your favorite Q album. It was an album, I remember you and I were getting to know each other pretty well at this point, and you felt much more strongly about it than I did, but I think yours is the more popular opinion. What do you love about Oxymoron?
I went to the album release party. I happened to be in LA that week, and I heard it, and it's really hard to digest albums at album release parties. On Dave season 2, that they talk about how people listening to it in a bar talking, and this wasn't in a bar, it was in a studio, but or like a art space or something like that. But it's hard to really like focus on the words because you are with people and stuff like that. So it wasn't until I really listened to the album that I heard it. And, songs like Man of the Year, the visuals really took it to a different level for me. Man of the Year was crazy visuals. I think that was Kendrick and Dave that directed that. Collard Greens, amazing video too. And that beat is just so driving. Hell of a Night video is incredible. Studio, I talked about, with Q singing on it, just completely different song, and with BJ the Chicago Kid on that too. And I think the one that really was the capper for me was Break the Bank. The Alchemist beat is just so spooky. But this album epitomizes ScHoolboy Q. Like, it is all about addiction and pain, and his childhood and all the crazy things he saw and had to overcome. And he just talks about it in such a real, visceral way. And again, like I said, as a cautionary tale, it just showed me just what a different level MCQ is. He's just more honest than almost any artist I can think of. Like and that resonates with me. I think that kind of truth just speaks to me.
Word.
So yeah.
No, I mean, in that in a lot of ways, that was TD kind of rolled up and went away for a minute, right? Like, it went back to the lab, so to speak.
Yeah, they don't reappear. Absol dropped these days, but not to a lot of fanfare, and then they don't really come back in earnest until March of 2015. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I just I remember at this point, AFH is really, I mean, we are I consider it a well-oiled machine, and we knew that this album was coming. And To Pimp a Butterfly, I forget the exact dates, but Kendrick released it.
It was on a Friday.
It was on a Friday and was supposed to be the following Tuesday, right?
Yep, that's right.
In the middle of March Madness, right?
I was in the movie parking lot. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was yeah, man. I remember that week very well. I was and it came out, and so the beginning of 2015, Drake puts out, if you're reading this, it's too late if I'm not mistaken, which was a different kind of sneak attack album when you have one of the biggest artists across genre doing without warning album that people are texting about. And then Kendrick does it, and he does it in a different way. I think we can both agree that if you're reading this, is not one of Drake's finest moments. I mean, it's a good body of work, but he's put out so many better, in my opinion. This, Kendrick arguably puts out his best record to date at this point, certainly one of his most conceptual. And he does it at a whim. Like, you were not at home ready to receive this album. He just kind of did it on a flash. And I think it was such an incredible body of work that showed you now on album number 3, by my count, everything is going to be its own succinct vision and commentary on what's going on in Kendrick's mind and the world at large. And yeah, I mean, this was an incredible body of work.
Yeah, the album had leaked, and so they wanted to get ahead of it. And it was a complete departure sonically from Good Kid, Mad City. So Kendrick is working with musicians. There's a lot of live instrumentation. Everyone from Robert Glasper and Thundercat to Flying Lotus and George Clinton. It's a masterful group of people. Terrace Martin's on it again. Mm-hmm. It went on to receive 11 nominations, which is the most in history for a rap artist in a single night. And only one off the overall record, which was shared by Michael Jackson and Babyface. Again, it won best rap album, so Kendrick finally gets that. But most people, including myself, believe he was robbed because he should have won the Album of the Year award. He had an incredible performance where he's in handcuffs and prison suits, and this is all happening while J-Rock has had a major motorcycle accident and was badly hurt. So Kendrick, you can only imagine what's going on in his mind between like the elation of like the Grammy celebration, but then also knowing that his brother is in the hospital and, and I think he was in critical condition for a little while. But that album was The Gift That Kept On Giving, All Right, produced by Pharrell and Soundwave, went on to become the anthem, the unofficial anthem for Black Lives Matter, unfortunately, both in 2016 and again in 2020. The video is, I think, a masterpiece. It's black and white. It's like 7 or 8 minutes long, just visually stunning. It features a snippet of a song in the beginning that we still haven't heard. That's really super dope. When in the car being carried by the police, it shows Kendrick being killed and like floating through the sky. And I think it was directed by Dave Meyers and maybe Dave Free too, little homies for that too. I can't remember.
I think you're right on that one. I know it was one of the big ones, but yeah.
Yeah. And then Kunta's Groove Sessions. Kendrick did a very small club tour. I actually saw that in Terminal 5 with my son and get a chance to introduce him to Kendrick and J-Rock, which was great. They both took photos with him, which had his Instagram popping, But that tour was incredible, just to see it live, and it earned him a trip to the White House. He became a favorite for Obama. In fact, Obama said that How Much a Dollar Costs from an album was his favorite song of the year. So really incredible.
And it's wild given the artwork too of that album of, folks outside the White House. And, it always amazes me as Kendrick continues to ascend and gets more resources and more attention, what he uses those to reinvest in his art. You mentioned the videos. It's not always about money with Kendrick. I'm sure that tour could have been an arena or a stadium tour easily, but the integrity is so, and it runs across TDE. There's not this pressure to put out albums all the time. You can go away for a few years. You can take this time. You can put away your phone, to use Kendrick's more recent statement, but it's always about the art. And I love the fact because so many artists that we've seen before and maybe feel very strongly for continue to make the same video or don't challenge themselves in all ways or reach people in the way that Kendrick has. And this album, I think, was it cemented a legacy. So we thought he would continue to build on top of that. But as we know, the life cycle of a top rapper can often be, if it's not, it can easily be 2 years. And Kendrick immediately just proved that and said, I'm here for the long haul. You can put me in that class with the Jay-Z's, with the LLs, with the OGs like that. And it's I think of 2015 with To Pimp a Butterfly, and I continue to put it on and be just marveled by the album. It's not one for me that I can come in and listen to one song. It's one that you have to play end to end.
So now at this point, he's got 3 classic albums: Section 80, Good Kid, Mad City, and To Pimp a Butterfly. Mm-hmm. So I recall this is when the GOAT conversation started around Kendrick. Did you share that? Were you starting to think of him as a GOAT contender at this point?
Not as much as you. It wasn't unreasonable to me. I think that, we're three deep. I want that fourth album, and beyond. But yeah, I mean, certainly of the artists that I've watched ascend in my time, because at this point, Kanye is part of that class, but I've watched Kanye deviate a bit with Yeezus and whatnot, and this one's something special.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't unreasonable at all. But for you, I know you were, a lot of people can say what they were talking about 6 years ago. You were making this point on the Reg.
I was making a point for sure. I wrote the Good Kid. I wrote the Good Kid, Mad City was a classic 5 days later, and revisited 5 years, and and I think people agree with me at this point, and so yeah, I was making the argument, and I was doing it based on albums, classic albums. To me, Jay-Z is, I think, held as the GOAT by more people than any other MC, regardless of your opinion on him or not. I think that if you were to take a poll, that Jay-Z would get the most votes, except for AFH, who gave it to Eminem as the GOAT. And Jay has 4 classic albums, in my opinion, at least 4. He's got Reasonable Doubt, Blueprint, Black Album. I would put 444 up there. Some people might put Volume 2 in there.
You might say American Gangster, but all day long, 4.
Yeah, he's got 4, right? And so to be the GOAT, you got to get more than that. And Kendrick having 3 is greater than most people, who, because you think of like people who have 3 classic albums, you get in the group territory, you're thinking Tribe, you're thinking Outkast, people like that. It's hard to think of single MCs. Some people might say Kanye's there, but because Kanye doesn't write most of his raps, I don't think most people would put him in that GOAT category. As an MC, maybe as an all-around artist
or a rapper.
So so I don't know that there's too many people who have 3. So I didn't think it was unreasonable to start to make that argument at the time, But so Kendrick's profile is rising. He interviews NWA later on that year for Billboard, for Straight Outta Compton. That's a milestone moment. And then in September of 2015, J-Rock releases 90059, which is really, really interesting. I love that album. I love that album. Went to the release party again, didn't hear it very well there, but when I sat and listened to it, just absolutely loved it. It's very soulful. I think it's rock at his best. Songs like Gumbo and Money Trees Part Deuce. But it was met with mixed reception. Like in a lot of ways, it wasn't received in the best way, but it's probably still my favorite J-Rock album to this day. But did you have thoughts about it when you first heard it?
It wasn't my favorite. I came around on it. I liked it, but I thought it really was an album that kind of positioned, or so we thought for the time, J-Rock as kind of the underdog of Black Hippy. The OG, but you were watching Q and Kendrick, and to a somewhat lesser extent, Ab-Soul, kind of accent. And J-Rock just has yet to have that moment. But as we'll talk about in a moment, he gets it later.
Yeah. So February, Kendrick performs at the Grammys. Actually, that's the handcuffs one. That's the prison uniform handcuffs.
Oh, okay, right.
And that sparked some controversy, as did the BET Awards performance that summer, where he was performing All Right on vandalized police cars with a big American flag in the background. So he's making his mark in pop culture with these performances that are real statements of defiance and activism. And then, a month later, he releases Untitled Unmastered. I think out of some pressure, LeBron even was like in on it, like, yo, Top, we need an album. And so like a couple of days later, they put that together. Well, obviously it wasn't in response to LeBron, but it was Lucy's from To Pimp a Butterfly. And I think a great album. I don't count it as part of his catalog because, I see it as more like lost tapes, B-sides, but still was entertaining.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm glad that we have it, and recently in the last year I've gone back and listened to it once or twice, but I don't consider that. I think Lost Tapes, B-sides, something like that is a great comparison.
Yeah. So you want to talk about what happened in July?
Yeah, absolutely. July, we got a huge album from Q with the Blank Face LP. We talk about trolling. Q, I don't think Kendrick's ever trolled us. I think Q and TDE with him have done it a few times. That was a time where, the artwork for a moment was either, you and I talked about it recently, was going to feature the crying Michael Jordan emoji or the Donald Trump emoji, a photo of Trump. And we reported it at AFH erroneously. But I think, to me, this is probably my second favorite Q album. I really, and you catch me on the right day, I might say it's his best. I think it's Q coming into his own with the resources available and really making a very polished album that still maintains, like you said, that upbringing from the streets, but doesn't have to talk about specifically that. It opens up to, his goals, his aspirations, his celebration of success. Just a joint. What's the song in there? Not Whatever You Like, but it got a title just like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That. It was one of my most.
Was the joint with SZA?
With the it's not SZA. It's another. It's not Stacey Barth. It's one of the other singers.
Oh, okay. I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
But that album to me was one of my most played of 2016. Just great stuff.
Yeah, and then that part remix is the Black Hippy joint that was my favorite of all time. Okay, that's the one where Kendrick spazzes and J-Rock kills it too. It's really dope. But the original featured Kanye, and Kanye's got a really unorthodox verse. Like he's like, okay, like Chipotle, he's like, and at first Q didn't like it. He thought Kanye was trolling him, really this is the verse. But then when he started performing it live and hearing the crowd feedback and how hyped they would get at that part, he knew what he had and really grew on him. Which I always thought that was a real interesting story. And later that year, Isaiah releases Son's Tirade in September, his first official album. Mm-hmm. And this to me is when he took his place on the varsity team, right? He wasn't just a new kid. He was actually a special talent. I saw him perform at South by Southwest once too. Voice is just penetrating, and he's just had it kind of pathos about him too that reminds me a lot of J-Rock, but yeah, just a really phenomenal talent. I know this album was special to you, right? This is your favorite Isaiah album?
Yeah, I mean, the Sylvia demo was one where I can admit it didn't connect with me, and it's one of those projects that a lot of people that I hold in high regard love. But this one, I really kind of saw what TDE saw in Isaiah, and I thought he made his own lane, which is kind of what we talk about. These artists get a developmental path, and yeah, I think your analogy of the varsity team says really well. And Isaiah came into his own. I had no surprise, but I think it's his best work.
Yeah. So now we're getting into 2017, and this is where, again, we keep. I keep thinking that Kendrick, because this is just natural for all artists, right? Eventually, artists plateau, and a 3-album run in hip hop is phenomenal. There's a image I posted recently with 3-album runs from artists, and there's probably only 6 or only 10 really great 3-album runs, not more than 20 for sure. And so for Kendrick to have 3 is phenomenal. But in April he releases Damn, and I've always likened Damn to Kendrick's Purple Rain moment, in that he's always been a respected artist amongst hip hop heads and a critical darling and things like that, as Prince was from For You through Dirty Mind, or through 1999. But when Prince dropped Purple Rain, it became a pop zeitgeist moment. He dominated everything. He was a pop culture superstar at that point. The movie, of course, helped that too, but the soundtrack was just incredible and had multiple #1 singles. Like he was in the status of Michael Jackson. Like he was arguably the biggest star on the planet.
Right.
And Damn is the first time that Kendrick outsold Drake and became the most popular rap artist on the planet. Even though he didn't in any way compromise his art, it was still in fact, it was arguably his most complex album to date. He dropped it on a Good Friday going into Coachella, and it sparked tons of rumors that he was going to release a second album on Easter called Nation, and together it was Damnation. And one was a story of Damnation, and the other one was one of us I'm losing the word, but basically like redemption. So right. The internet was on fire with that rumor that he released a second album. So you want to take over from there?
Yeah, man. I mean, it came out. It was. Were you at Coachella?
I was not at Coachella that year. No.
I remember us covering you. I think you did the initial album story. I think we just kind of said Kendrick album's out. Listen here, but to what you said a moment ago, I mean, this to me, it might not be anyone's favorite. I think it's the most interesting Kendrick Lamar album because, again, he makes a totally different lane. This one, at times, I mean, in its sound is much more pop leaning, but there's no compromise on the rapping. And then when you take a step back and you figure out the concept of two albums do exist, you can go in either direction, and you get two totally different narratives. You can look at the Kid Capri involvement, which I thought is another, like, you talk about MC8, or GLC, like the left field, just like, yo, I'm gonna really kind of orchestrate this my way. It's a mind-blowing album. Like, this to me is calculus. Like, listen to this album. And you of all people, you had been up a number of, I can't remember how far after it was. Album drops on a Friday. I believe you kind of had
it was 2 weeks 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later is how long?
Yeah, I think the album dropped on April
14th.
13th, Friday the 13th.
Oh, word, yeah.
And it was on April 30th.
That's right.
So so for 2 weeks, I was absolutely obsessed with this album. Like, I had not been as obsessed with an album since Erykah Badu's Baduism. Like, listening to it all day, every day on repeat. And I started reading different theories online and like piecing things together. I watched his interview with Zane Lowe. Zane Lowe asked him, so, is this the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? Mm-hmm. And like, after a while it clicked for me. So I went to one of my best friends, a college roommate's wedding that weekend. And on the Friday of that weekend, I had dropped a note in the document saying, yo, I think Kendrick's album, because a lot of people, there's a theory that the album should be played backwards, right?
Right.
And then, so I was like, okay, I don't think that quite captures it. I do think it's meant to be played forwards too. And I was like, wait, it's meant to be played forwards and backwards. And the album takes on two meanings depending on which direction you play it in. If you play it forwards, it's a story of, a person like transcending his DNA and having free will, and a story of redemption. If you play it backwards, ending in DNA, it's a story of like, we're just hardwired, and it's fate, and you can't, it's wickedness. And I started thinking wickedness. And I was like, wait a minute. Is it weakness? Is it wickedness? You decide, are we going to live or die? It's a choose your own story type of scenario. And I put that in the document, and you and Amanda were like, you ignored it. You ignored it for 2 days. And I was like, okay, wow. So I took it out of the document. I was like, okay, that's nothing. And so that night of the wedding, I was talking to my guy, Ian Stamen, former Tommy Boy A&R dude, A&R for some great De La Soul records, has his own blog called Different Kitchen. Super music head. I used to argue with him all the time in college about music. I still argue with him every day in a group chat. But I told him the theory. He was like, yo, I would write that article if I was you. I was like, word? And he's like, yeah. And so that night I was like, drinking heavily, of course, because it's the wedding and everything. Yeah. The next day I wake up and my guy's got, you know, these IVs that you can do, like, you know, that rehydrate you. Like he got that for all the wedding people. I'd never done it. So I tried it. I get on the plane and I start writing, and I write for 5 hours straight. I do not like get up to go to the bathroom. I don't take a sip of water, anything. I look like I'm possessed. I get home, I keep writing for another 4 or 5 hours. I'm pulling together all sorts of clues, like, you know, tweets and like Instagram posts and, you know, and quotes and stuff. And I'm putting together this theory that the album is meant to be played backwards and forwards. And I'll never forget, at like 11:05 that night, I posted it. Then I went to sleep. I didn't even look to see the reaction. And it was like, the headline was, "The rumors were right. Kendrick Lamar did release 2 albums." And I woke up the next morning and you had written, "Damn, Reggie broke the internet," or something like that. Like,
yeah. Sounds like me.
Then I looked and we were at like 2,000 real time, and it was like 12 hours later, and we had like something like 500,000 uniques overnight. And I was like, whoa. So yeah, that was crazy.
Benchmark moment for AFH. And yeah, I mean, MTV had covered that. There were several people that gave us credit, you know, and I say us because of the pride that we take as AFH. But, you know, really, I give you a world of credit, especially in the face of, you know, apathy. And I'll admit that. And we had a lot going on at that point. You know, it wasn't any passive aggressiveness or anything like that, but there were a lot of boxes to check. But I always regret that. And I think it's a testament to your tenacity and perseverance to make that pop, you know?
Yeah, it was crazy just how it played out. You know, Kendrick confirming it with MTV and then linking back to us, you know, in August. And then Ronnie Carmichael from NPR, like in his year-long wrap-up, like citing us, like definitely one of my proudest moments for the site, you know. But
at a moment we needed it too. Yeah.
And for it to be in conjunction with, you know, one of my favorite artists of all time was incredible. But, you know, then the Dissect podcast was like unbelievable. It came out on Spotify. But this album was one of the greatest concept albums of all time, and not by rap, anything. Like it just, it's so complex, and you know, it lets you know just the amount of thought that Kendrick put into this and why it takes years for him to put things together. You know, he just is an artist of a completely different level than most. You know, most are focused on punchlines and, like, you know, you'll get some occasional storytelling, but this guy is writing, like, you know, Bible allegories, and like just, it's just incredible.
It's like a novel. Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
you see why he's a Pulitzer Prize winning MC.
Yeah, and he won Best Rap Album, right? But not Album of the Year, but then goes on to win the Pulitzer and becomes the first artist in history who's non-classical or non-jazz to win a Pulitzer. Like, I mean, just incredible, you know?
Yeah, and I feel that Kendrick not winning Album of the Year was a major turning point for the Grammys too, as every year more and more, you know, hip hop heads in particular and just modern culture, you know, debates their validity. I feel like not recognizing Kendrick at the level in which he deserves for 2 years in a row has been, you know, I think it's had consequences.
Yeah, I don't think TDE has attended the Grammys since then.
Even beyond that, though, I think that, yeah, you know, they're huge. But yeah, to that point, I don't, whenever Kendrick drops his next album, I would suspect it'll be a contender, just given his pedigree. And I'll be shocked if he's up there to receive the honors.
Yeah. So SZA releases Control, you know, ironically, you know, titled, and she steps into her womanhood fully that year. This is June of 2017. This album takes her to a different level. She becomes like an icon for lots of like girls around the country, and just people generally. The album's nominated for 5 Grammys, and it really does cement TDE's status as a full service label, not just hip hop. And then later in September, Kendrick and Top are featured on Billboard. And I know that was written by someone you name checked earlier. You want to talk about that? Andreas.
Oh, Hill. That's right. Yeah. Andreas Hill wrote that.
Yeah.
Yeah, word. And that's such an incredible story. I remember where I was when You and I, we had a
Oh
phone
wait,
conversation.
let me pull that back. It was day was it day Twan?
Day Twan.
Day
Yeah,
Twan,
yeah.
yeah. It was day
I was gonna
Twan. Yeah.
say because I
It's
mean
day
Dre's
Twan.
covered
Yeah.
TDA in recent years. It was
Yeah,
Day
it's day
Twan.
Twan.
But I remember where I was when that happened, and we had a huddle as we often did, and that article was huge in many ways. It was very, it offered rare access to both Kendrick and TD and Top, but it also revealed something that Kendrick had never shared previously, is that, he had an equity stake in the label. And, what's interesting is that article, our aggregation of that Billboard piece this week has become one of our most read pieces,
Is
because
that
as
right?
Kendrick makes this pivot, I think people are still realizing that he has a stake in TDE, presuming that hasn't changed, and I don't see why it would. But it was just such a cool way of two guys doing business. And as we've seen so many great artists get jerked or have, acrimony with their labels, to see that kind of investment on both sides was huge.
Yeah, and that partnership manifested again in 2018. Kendrick and Top make history again. They executive produced the Black Panther soundtrack. That movie was, we wrote an article about it being more than a movie; it's a movement. It goes on to become, like, I think the highest grossing film of all time at that time, over $1 billion. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. But Kendrick and Top executive produced the soundtrack, and it became a TDE showcase. Reason was on that. Absol. J-Rock has his biggest song ever, King's Ransom, goes on did it win a Grammy? It was nominated.
It was nominated. He got his
actually
Grammy.
It did win for best rap performance. King's Dead won for that. It didn't win best rap record, but it won best rap performance. And the album won best soundtrack for Grammy, and it won the best original score for the Oscars. But it's the first ever, like, kind of original soundtrack, using multiple recordings created specifically for a Marvel film, which is incredible.
Yeah, and I think it took soundtracks to the highest level. I mean, to me, that was a contender of the best hip hop albums that year. And I mean, there's great soundtracks from Colors to Above the Rim, so on and so forth, Menace to Society. But to see this penetrate culture the way that it did was crazy. And it was a TDE moment. But you're absolutely right. It was the label, but it also showed Kendrick Lamar's curation. And, like, Reason was a part of that, but even SOB, RBE, like, there were Amazi, there were artists that had no affiliation whatsoever to TDE, but that these guys messed with and listened to and liked, and they brought them into the spotlight with them for a #1 album with all of these accolades. I thought that was huge at such a big moment for culture.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about Kendrick's, like, power of curation, because in a lot of ways he's becoming a label exec and doing this, and he does it again in June with the release of J-Rock's Redemption, aptly titled album. It is J-Rock's victory lap, his win. It's his moment in the sun. He ends up performing, opening up the BET Awards with that song. And Kendrick executive produced the album, and he tapped into a new sound, a more updated sound, a different, less complex flow, and over more current sounding beats, almost trap beats, with King's Redemption, and King's Dead, and a lot of Redemption has that sound, and I would attribute that to Kendrick. So I think that bodes well for whatever he does in the future with his label too.
That's my favorite J-Rock album, by the way. I've said that with each of these artists, but that one I thought he reached, such great potential on.
Yeah. And so you want to talk about August? I know it's an artist who's near and dear to both of us.
Yeah. I mean, we're watching at this point. I mean, TDE kind of expanded to possibly the third generation. You have artists like Sir, who we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but, they came with another spitter from Carson, California, Reason. And, again, he was on the Black Panther soundtrack with very little fanfare. And I mean, as is the TDE way, that soundtrack just speaks for itself. Videos come as they will, performances. But, Reason has, TDE is an artist as a label of very unique sounding artists. All of them have distinct vocal deliveries and voices and all of that. And Reason, to me, I know to you, is like a 2010 TDE artist. Just that conviction, that belief in self, that story, that projection of overcoming odds to be there, and to rap kind of with no breaks. And you know, the soul Reason raps about his place on the label and even the insecurities of like, you know, he might never be Kendrick, but no, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. And I've been on Top's ass for years to like, let me shine, let me have this moment. Or at that point, it was months, not years. But he raps with no fear of repercussion, which we've talked about. We've seen that from Ab-Soul. We've seen that from ScHoolboy Q. We've seen that from Kendrick. And in a lot of ways, I mean, for much of 2018, and Reason didn't really kind of get his moment beyond the soundtrack until August. But those last 3-4 months, we spent a ton of time, you know, celebrating him on the site, and you and I talking about him in our discussions. And I know you made it a purpose to get that interview with him ASAP, which we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still love that interview, even with the like terrible background noise and everything. I think it really laid out his story in a great way, you know. And so April of 2019, ScHoolboy Q releases Crash Talk. You know, it's an interesting rollout. It's a lot of talk about like how Q is in a better place and how golf has kind of like brought peace to him. Mm-hmm. But the album doesn't really land. Like it kind of came and went, which is really interesting. And it's not until October. The biggest news of the year for TDE, unfortunately, that year is not related to an album release, but in October, Dave Free announces, it's announced, he didn't even comment on it, that Dave Free, co-president, is leaving TDE. And again, that's Kendrick's manager, one of the little homies. Dave, I think, deserves a lot of credit in architecting the internet strategy that TDE used in the early days to really kind of take over the blogs. Mm-hmm. Really just an incredibly talented individual on business and creative levels. So it's a huge loss for him to leave. And given the tightness that he and Kendrick have, like there's a lot of speculation that Kendrick is going to go with him. You know, and you know, Dave to this day, I don't think has ever said anything about it. I've never seen anything on record. And in fact, if you Google his name, you don't see anything beyond that. But he does announce a little bit later in March of 2020 that he's starting a company called PG Lang with Kendrick. The two of them launch a company, and it's just a creative company at service to creators and projects that selflessly speak with and for the shared experiences that connect us all, is what they say. So it's not a label. It's not like necessarily a film studio. It's just like kind of a creative like incubator. It sounds like almost like Creative Control was back in the day.
Yeah, that's a great comparison right there, because I think we've yet to see what this means. But that way, I thought it gives them license to be involved in video and touring and, you know, production and film, whatever. And clearly they're two very good minds behind all of that. But yeah, it was a shocker. And one thing that's interesting is, you know, two of TD's top execs, Dave Free and Punch has throughout this time released songs, Lucy's, you know, and never given up his aspirations to rap. And a lot of those songs we covered on AFH and were very good. And, you know, Dave, you know, on the musical and technical side has continued to produce and DJ at various points, despite becoming one of the most influential executives in the music business.
Yeah. And so, but when they announced PG Lang, the rumors get the spike again that Kendrick is leaving. And I think you and I talked about it, you know, I thought it was very possible. At some point, I can't remember if it was before or after PG Lang, Kendrick and Top appeared in a photo together on IG just to like shut people up. You know, and then March was a really quiet year. Aside from that, Reason released New Beginnings. It was the only release that TDE has had since April of 2019. You know, now COVID, like, you know, affected many people's release schedules, but still it was very eerily quiet.
Yeah, and I mean, even Reason has kind of downplayed the album. I mean, you and I, we put it on our best of 2020 list, and it 100% deserved to be there. But I think that Reason has another one in the chamber, especially the way that he works. And to the point we made a moment ago, Reason works like Kendrick and Ab and Q did early in their careers, where you might get boom, one after another. And I feel like Reason is still coming into his just due as a standout MC. But yeah, I mean, a very, very, very quiet year throughout the rest of 2020 into April of this year with, you mentioned earlier ago, but, Top tweeting the wait is over. Some speculating that meant Kendrick. More accurately, we got Isaiah Rashad and and into a long hot summer, of the news that kind of takes us here.
And Isaiah's album is called The House is Burning, which is interesting too, given the news that we got just on Friday then. So Friday is when Kendrick releases his statement saying that, he is working on his album and it will be his final album for TDE. And the rest, as they say, is history. And so, you read Top Dawg's statement and, it was definitely the epitome of brotherhood and class, in my opinion. Really fantastic to see. So given all this now that the era is ending, where do you put TDE? So Billboard, the article called them the greatest independent label in history. I don't even know if I call them fully independent because they did have affiliations with Interscope,
right,
and Warner.
Right.
But I think they ran themselves like an independent label at all times, and Top was always the one in control. But I want to take the indie qualifier off. Where do you put them? Let's start with the 2010s. I say that they're the greatest hip hop label of the 2010s.
Hands down, they're the top dogs of that. I mean, of the 2010s, I feel like MMG had a really strong start, but MMG is an evolving thing. And Dreamville, I think right now, and you and I have talked about this, Dreamville may be at a more exciting point right here in 2020 and 2021. But within those 10 years, I do not think there is a more exciting label in hip hop. The closest contender, and this is a testament to what Top Dawg has accomplished, is Def Jam. Because in those years, you've got some incredible releases from Kanye West. You've got some incredible albums from The Roots. You've got Big Boy. You've got YG. But the difference is, and you and I spoke about this recently, before DMX died, but in discussing his album and his return to Def Jam to some extent has lacked a brand identity. I mean, it has a tremendous legacy that should always be respected, but I don't know that we know what a Def Jam stamp of quality is right now because of where the industry is at. Whereas Top Dawg means something. Top Dawg moves like Def Jam in the 80s or Def Jam in the 90s or the early 2000s. And the fact that they have developed artists in that 10-year window, I don't think anything can compete with that. What about you?
No, I 100% agree. The only other label, and like the Def Jam, it's hard for me to put them in the same category because it's very different. Now it's more of a label group. I think even Justin Bieber is on Def Jam. It's very different than what it used to be. So yeah, the only thing I can think of is MMG, and Ross had a great run with Meek and Wale and himself, of course, and Stalley. But I don't think anything compares to TDE over that 10-year period. Now, what about all time? Would you say top 5?
Definitely top 10, top 5. I don't refute, but I would need to think about. Because I think that there were some labels in the 80s and 90s that, again, development counts so much. If you're just a label and you get the top artists, I think that Tupac and Death Row have a great history together, and shout out to Death Row for creating a home for him post-prison. But Tupac was going to make a great album wherever he went, I believe. I mean, it's great that he was with Dre and Daz and them. But TDE developed artists. Isaiah Rashad, when there were grumblings of his signing, went from this guy it was either Audio Mac or SoundCloud, had very few listens, into a groomed, poised artist overnight. not overnight, but in a matter of days, because they saw something. Reason was like that. I mean, Reason's mixtape was out there floating for months, and then all of a sudden the opportunity presented itself. So I really, Top Dawg all day long is top 10, top 5. I think so. I really think all time that could be made. I think, and this might sound like a cop out. I think what this last Kendrick Lamar Top Dawg album sounds like, that's the ball in the hands of the all-star, right at the buzzer. What he's going to do right now is huge.
Yeah, it's hard, man. Top 10, I think for sure. Top 5, I think just like top 5 MCs, like there are probably 25 MCs you could put in the top 5, and
Yeah.
no one would look at you sideways for it. So, but you think about Def Jam, Death Row, Bad Boy, Tommy Boy, Jive Records.
Jive.
There are a lot of great labels over the Rawkus. Would you put them ahead of Rawkus at this point?
I mean, Rawkus's run was, in my estimation, 97, 98 to 2003, and then, they were around 2006. Yeah, I think in terms of classics, TDE has more. And, Rawkus has 4 or 5 artists with classics. Yeah. TDE is right there too. I think so, and I might get killed for that in the comments, but I do think I put them ahead of Rawkus at this point.
So now, what do you think happens for Kendrick and for TDE? I think Kendrick. It's not even clear to me that he repartners with Dave in full. He might literally just be on his own muse, and he and Dave are, I think, going to be partnered, in some way, just generally because of the relationship there. But I could see him either doing that in full or doing his own thing and just, but either way, because of the kind of artist he is, I think he continues to be great. And, I don't know if he ever has the same level of success that he had with Damn, because that's hard to achieve. Prince never did with Purple Rain, and that's not a knock, because Prince had Sign of the Times and the Symbol album and 5, 10 other phenomenal albums after that stood with every one of his albums. So, but the public is a fickle thing when it comes to popularity. But I wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't bet against him having continuing to rise. He's like Tom Brady at this point. To bet against him would be foolish. And I kind of liken it to Brady and the Patriots. I think Brady has continued to be great and is still a Super Bowl MVP, winning rings. I think that's going to be Kendrick. And the Patriots this year are shaping up to be pretty damn good too. And TDE has still got a roster of phenomenal artists. Every artist we talked about is still there and tremendous. And they're adding to it. Isaiah's album, I think, is great. We didn't talk about that, but the album he released this year, I really, really like. Like you said, Reason's probably got something in the chamber. And they've shown themselves to pull in new talent again and again. So, I think both are going to be just fine. But, again, end of an era. And I wanted to celebrate it. I'm sure a lot of people think it was long-winded, but I love this label. I have a lot of love for each of the people who have made it, both personally and professionally. And I think it's important to celebrate these kind of milestones.
I wholeheartedly agree. I look at what the 2010s were, what we were when they started, what they are, 11 years later, and TD is a part of that. And they legitimized a space the same way in the 90s, the Source magazine, found, covered Biggie before Bad Boy and led to a signing, or Common, or, Big Pun. TDE proved that these artists on websites that had followings but weren't covering what was on radio or weren't covering what was on MTV, shout out to BET and you for narrowing that gap, mattered. And they could be stars. Anyone could be great if you worked at it. And Kendrick Lamar happened to be that anyone. And I do. I see from here on out probably an Andre 3000 sort of trajectory. I think Kendrick Lamar loves hip hop way too much to ever stop making it, but I think he wants to make it on his terms, and perhaps, as presumed a still owner of the company and Top's protege. I mean, he's often positioned Top as a like the number two male influence on his life besides his father. I think that in some ways a move like this allows the reasons of the world to get their due shine, and presumably Ab-Soul, ScHoolboy Q, J-Rock too. But this is the end of an era, and one that I hold near and dear to my career, and just what this music did to keep my faith in hip hop and keep me involved and have me looking at possibly doing other things with my life and time. But with artists like K-Dot out here, I'm like, yo, I want to work in hip hop, but I want to work with the guy who put him on television, for the first time and all of that.
Word. Well, yo, it's been a long one, but for those who still around, Jake and I are taking a couple weeks off. So hopefully this will, hold us down for a couple weeks. We got a really amazing interview coming up in September. I think everyone's going to be quite happy with that one. But anything else you want to hit?
No, man, I think there's a lot of things developing right now. I think there will be some albums when we return to talk about and unpack, but I don't want to speculate. I think this is good, man. I think it's really important to take a whole episode. We've done this a few times recently with other topical things, and really kind of speak the backstory. You did a phenomenal job laying out the timeline, and yeah, man, I think we let this one simmer.
Word. All right, man. So what's your song of the week?
Yo, man, I'm going to keep it on Kendrick. I'm going to go, we talked about it in the pod, but I'm going to go with Poor Man's Dreams. That is even saying his title, man, just kind of has a visceral feeling. What about you?
Wow, that's a crazy one, man. That's a crazy one. I'm going to go with Blessed. That was a song that I played over and over and over again back in the day. Just Q and the chords and the Kendrick verse too, like really dope. But that to me is like heart of TDE, man. That early 2010s era, like just incredible. So yeah, man. Shout out to TDE. Shout out to Kendrick. And until we meet again.
Thank you for all the support, TDE, Kendrick, J-Rock of AFH, man. I'm so proud to be part of this because of, the work you did, Reggie, with those guys, man. It's great hearing some of those stories.
And you too, man. We've both been in the trenches since early on, not day one, but early enough. So
yeah, man, we ain't going nowhere. So I'll see you in the trenches in a couple weeks. All right.
All right, man. All right,
man.
Peace.